Hello, romance lovers. Today's story is called The Villainess is a Marionette. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more exciting stories. The nightlife of the Eldame Empire never seemed to stop. And although night had long since fallen on the city and the empire itself, inside the imperial castle, social life was in full swing. The imperial palace was immersed in luxury. Marble columns reflected the light of thousands of candles, and the ceilings, decorated with exquisite paintings, seemed to float in a warm golden glow. Guests, dressed in outfits made of the finest fabrics, laughed, conducting leisurely conversations, accompanied by the ringing of glasses with rare wine. But amidst all this splendor, there was something invisible, a shadow of intrigue, hidden glances, barely noticeable nods conveying secret messages. A crowd of people gathered around the young girl. They said how incredibly beautiful she was, and asked Her Highness the Princess to give her a dance. She, of course, was very pleased with such attention from the men surrounding her. Exquisitely shod and dressed, she enjoyed the impression she made on those around her. She was the only princess of this empire. The emperor's daughter was unique. She was used to being the first at all the balls and competitions. This beauty's name was Kana Hill, and she was the daughter of a former emperor and the sister of a young man who had recently taken his father's throne. A young man, still very young in appearance, approached the girl. He turned to his sister and said that he was glad to congratulate her on her coming-of-age ceremony. This was the new emperor of their empire, Rezef Hill. Not far from them, another young man was bored and alone. He was silently drinking champagne, not paying attention to what was happening around him. It was Duke Raffaello. Kidri. The emperor approached his beautiful sister, knelt down before her, and kissing her hand, said that he wished that she would always be as beautiful today and tomorrow as she was on this wonderful day. The young princess seemed to be enjoying the day. She felt like the most perfect person in the world, the most beautiful princess of the entire empire, who could have everything she wanted. She smiled sweetly and laughed at the jokes of the young people around her. She was pleased to be the object of their attention and the center of today's party. But unfortunately, it couldn't go on like this forever. Everything has a beginning, and everything must end someday. Besides, beauty can't give anyone true power. The strong power in their empire was wielded by a completely different person, and it was her own younger brother who sat on his throne. And the poor princess was summoned by his order. The girl could not contain her emotions and screamed that this was just a plot that someone had made against her, and she could guess who could have done it. This rude and dirty girl dared to look at Duke Kidri. Then the princess saw that her words had not had the desired effect on her brother, and continued, declaring that it was all because of her, because otherwise the Duke could not have been so cold to her. She demanded that this shameless girl be killed immediately. If she had wanted to move her brother to pity or to awaken a spark of anger outside of him, she had failed. The prince continued to look calmly in her direction without expressing any emotion. And then the young man sitting on the throne simply laughed in his sister's face. He asked her if she still hadn't figured it out. He said that he had known about his sister's stupidity for a long time, but he had no idea that she would be such a fool. The princess couldn't believe the words she had just heard from her brother. He had always been so kind and friendly to her. And now there seemed to be some kind of threat in his tone, because he said that she couldn't even comprehend the entire situation she was in. Then the young man stood up from his throne and began to approach the girl standing in front of him. He came closer and said that she would not be able to kill Olivia. And then he threatened her that if she also continued to pursue her, he would be forced to take action against her. The prince reached his hand forward to the girl's face and touched her cheek. He told her that she was powerless to change anything, and that there was nothing that could be done. Without removing his hand from her face, he seemed to have decided to threaten with this hand, lightly squeezing her face, and said that if she continued in the same spirit, then he would have to get rid of his sister with his own hands. The princess did not expect this at all. She was amazed at how her beloved brother behaved with her. She understood that if he wanted to get rid of her, then no one would ever be able to stop him. Kana knelt before her brother and begged the emperor to spare her. She told him that she was his sister, and how could he treat her like that? Then she added that it was she who had made him emperor, but the prince only smirked at her. He didn't care about his crying sister's feelings at all. He said that she should understand that she was simply used and no one needed her anymore. Her brother Rezef had changed completely since he became emperor. He was very different from the young man he had been before. and he asked her to finally realize that all the power she had previously wielded now belonged to him. The girl bowed before him in a submissive curtsy and told her brother that Gotova would fulfill any command of her master. He looked at her and decided that she was now his pathetic doll. This was the plot of the book the girl was reading on her smartphone. She had been engrossed in reading this novel lately. Kana was a beautiful but stupid and cruel character. In this novel, all the other virgin characters change for the better under the beneficial influence of the main character, whose name is Olivia. It was a standard story about the birth of love. Kana did not experience any feelings other than envy and hatred for the main character, and was used by her younger brother, who dreamed about Olivia all the time. Eventually, the princess reached the point where she lost control of herself and was even ready to commit murder. She tried to poison the main character of the novel. However, everything ended very tragically for her. Her plan to get rid of her hated rival failed, and she was betrayed by her brother, who ordered her capture and promised to punish her severely. Marriage was chosen as a punishment, and it happened not out of love, but because it was advantageous to the new emperor. She was sold to the cruel and treacherous Viscount Killian, who mocked and beat her. Unfortunately, this could lead to nothing but a bloody outcome. And then this girl met her sad death. The girl from the modern world read about all these events in a book. It was a novel that she read only to make sure that in the end, all the villains end up exactly the same. The girl mentally compared herself with the heroine of the book she had read, and once again became convinced that they were very similar. Moreover, the similarity was not so much external as in the way they were accustomed to acting with others, and the people around them did the same to them. They were both puppets, completely used by someone. And now one of her puppeteers asked her not to be angry with him, and said that it was thanks to him that she became the head of the department. And while the man was saying that it was he who had helped her gain her current position, and demanded that she finally realize that all the power she had now belonged to her, the girl wondered if the same fate awaited her and the princess from the book. She walked out of the office and thought how disgusting it was to live as someone's doll. The street was deserted at this time of night, and it was quite quiet, since there was no transport. The girl walked to her car and grabbed the door handle to go home, but at that moment she heard someone next to her say the words, "It's all because of you." A man wearing a cap and a jacket hood over it approached her and began to look threateningly in the girl's direction. She was very scared by both the stranger's words and how unexpectedly he appeared in the parking lot. The girl asked him, "Who are you?" Then she saw something shiny in the man's hand. Looking closely, the girl began to discern a sharp knife in the stranger's hand, the blade of which was pointed menacingly in her direction. The man did not wait long. He began to approach the dumbfounded girl and pointed the knife closer and closer to her body. At the same time, he said loudly that he had become exactly like this all because of the girl standing in front of him. She realized that she would not be able to escape because the stranger was close to her and there was nowhere to run. It seemed that certain death awaited her, and the next moment, a tragic event occurred. Her blood splattered all over the asphalt of the parking lot. The wounded girl fell next to her car. A pool of her own blood began to form underneath her. It was very painful, and she grabbed the wound in her stomach with both hands. Her attacker was standing next to her. She looked in his direction and saw only some silhouette, which had no face and which looked like a maniac. When this man came a little closer and the girl managed to focus her vision, she thought that this was the same man whose project was given to her because of the scandal about his immoral actions. Apparently, this was his way of taking revenge on the office worker who worked on his project after he was fired. It seems the girl thought that the end is the same for all villains. When her strength completely left her, she stopped struggling and closed her eyes, preparing for the inevitable death. She thought that at least dying this way would be quite nice. The main thing is that death should be painful and instantaneous. The girl thought that this was the end. Her life was over. And she, unfortunately, did not manage to do anything that would make her memorable to people, but then she heard someone next to her say, "Her Highness woke up," and after these words, she opened her eyelids. After that, the blurred silhouettes became clearer. She saw some people surrounding her, apparently ladies-in-waiting and servants. These people addressed her, calling her Highness and Princess. They were glad that she had finally come to her senses and ordered that everything be quickly reported to the prince. She raised her hands up and began to examine them carefully. It seemed to her that this could not be, and she really wanted to know what had happened to her in the end. She was definitely sure that she had died, but somehow she was now in the imperial palace. A young man she did not know approached her and called her sister. She was simply stunned by everything that had happened to her. After the killer had dealt her what seemed to be a fatal blow and she was bleeding to death in a parking lot, the girl somehow woke up in a bed in a luxurious room in the palace. The young man who came into her room continued to call her sister. He gently took her hand and began to stroke it. The young man, who turned out to be a prince, took the girl's hand in his and touched her with his lips, kissing her lightly. The young man, who turned out to be a prince, took the girl's hand in his and touched her with his lips, kissing her lightly. The girl, who had just woken up, could not understand what it was and whether she was dreaming. The prince called her Kane's sister and asked her if she was okay. When he touched her, and when she heard his voice, she somehow remembered his hand that touched her face and neck. That time he told her these words, "There's nothing you can do about it." After this, he moved even closer to her and squeezed her face with his hand, whispering in her ear that in that case he would have to get rid of her with his own hands. It seemed that the girl began to understand what could have happened to her. After painful memories, tears began to flow down her face. She realized who was sitting in front of her, and she realized that she had most likely gotten into someone else's body. It seemed that her new body remained disobedient. The girl who found herself in the princess's body tried to stand up, but she did so with difficulty. She leaned on the bed and turned a little. It seemed that her new relative, and at the same time the prince of the empire, was very upset by this. He shouted loudly, addressing her, and asked where she decided to go, but the princess did not answer her brother's question. She walked with slow, uncertain steps across the floor of the imperial palace, slapping her bare heels against it. She felt her body begin to obey her. Her steps became more confident and faster. Although she felt her new body trembling and shuddering, she really wanted to make sure that she really was in another body, and she walked towards the mirror. Looking into it, she was able to make sure that she really was in a new body for herself, which belonged to Cana Hill. After she looked out the window, her guess was only confirmed because she really found herself in the imperial palace, about which she had recently learned so much from the pages of the novel she had read. She began to examine the room in which she had just recently woken up. These were truly royal chambers. Everything here was impressive in its luxury and sophistication. This seemed completely unbelievable to the girl. After all, in her previous life, she had already prepared herself to meet her inevitable death. And now it was unclear how she had ended up in the body of a villainess she had recently read about in a book, and who seemed similar to her. The princess, with a trembling hand, took hold of the edge of the bed and began to think, nervously squeezing the sheet in her hand. She wondered if life in that reality was really her second life. She thought that it was not for nothing that her gaze had caught on this villainess. For some reason, she had found herself in the body of this spoiled, capricious young lady. She thought that the reason for everything that had happened to her was connected with what had happened to her in her past life, when she had committed many unseemly acts, which she now regretted. The girl once again remembered the face of the man who had looked at her angrily after he had dealt her the fatal blow. If she remembered all of this, then she must really be dead. She remembered again how she had bent over from the unbearable pain in her stomach, trying to get rid of it, and her blood had spurted out of her wound, forming a pool under her body. One of her maids came to her and asked if her mistress was awake. She brought her a dish of water for washing and napkins. The girl was stunned by the words of the woman who entered, because she told her that her face had become very sunken because of the poison, and then added that her outfit would soon be ready. The outfit was the least of the lady's worries. She was wondering what kind of poison it was that had caused her to suffer. The princess thought and began to reflect. Suddenly, she felt an incomprehensible tremor in her body, and it seemed to her that these were not reflections, but memories of what had happened to her earlier. It is unclear how a vision of people dancing at a ball, having fun and talking loudly among themselves appeared before her eyes. Then she remembered how at the same ball she was drinking red wine from a glass, taking small sips to enjoy its exquisite taste. After this, she clearly saw in front of her how her body refused to obey her and began to slowly sink to the floor. And in the end, the princess landed right on the ball. She saw her brain slowly dying. She looked at the ceiling, and it kept blurring in her eyes. The stunned princess could not believe what she had just remembered. She knew that these were probably the memories of the former owner of this body, who had probably died after being poisoned. The girl thought that, probably during the banquet, the princess drank a glass, after which she began to cough up blood, and, as luck would have it, it was at that moment that she entered her body. The maid asked her if perhaps she should call a doctor, since the lady's complexion was unhealthy. but she objected and said that everything was fine and there was no need to worry, and that she should just leave. The maid could not understand what had happened to her mistress. The princess was behaving rather strangely and unusually. Previously, she would have certainly made some kind of scandal, but today, something was wrong. It was with the thought that something had changed that the maid left her. But after some time, she returned to her princess's bedroom. She had to get ready for a walk in the fresh air. The girl really liked the princess's hair. It looked simply magnificent. And the process of combing it also brought her pleasure. She stood by her mistress's bed and combed her hair, but she was haunted by the thought of what could have happened to her mistress, that she had changed so much after she regained consciousness. The girl thought the whole situation looked a little funny because she was preening herself right after she had just barely managed to recover from the effects of the poisoning. When her hair was tidied up, she began to look closely at her new face. It was almost no different from her previous one. She no longer thought that it looked funny because this was the real life of a princess. After all, it was a life for the sake of beauty. Memories of the ball and the words of the men around her that she was incredibly beautiful and that there was no one in the world whose beauty surpassed that of Her Majesty came back to her mind. These words had been surrounding her lately, and they sounded something like this. They were common, often repeated phrases. Your smile is incredible. God, you're indistinguishable from a doll. You need to wear even more beautiful clothes. A woman's strength is in her beauty. The princess's memories looked quite funny to the girl who found herself in her body, and she even grinned again and laughed slightly at the words of the enthusiastic men complimenting their mistress. Her maid could not understand what had suddenly happened to her mistress and asked if everything was all right. She replied that she had absolutely nothing to worry about. She still couldn't understand how this could happen. It was simply unbelievable that she found herself in the body of the heroine of the novel she had recently read. She nervously clutched the hem of her dress in her hand and thought that, thank God, she had managed to be reborn at the moment when it was not yet too late. Her own brother was still a prince because the princess's own father, the emperor, was still alive, as she learned from her maid. This made the girl very happy, because she still had time to try to fix everything. The fact that her father was alive meant that the only thing holding her brother Izef still existed. She knew that time was running out. Remembering her brother's face, she remembered that very soon he would become an emperor. And this would greatly affect her future life. The girl who found herself in the princess's body was determined to change future events. By the time her brother became emperor, she needed to get as far away from him as possible. She knew she didn't have many options now. She had to do something. And she decided the only thing she could do was marry someone. Of course, it would be better to become the wife of not a madman, like Viscount Killian, but a man who could then be easily controlled. She would really like it if it was a completely different type of man. No. Let it be a nice and careful man who will not limit her in anything. The girl began to think about her upcoming marriage. First, she needed a way to deceive her brother's eyes and ears, and then run away as far as possible from him. The princess was distracted from her thoughts by a knock at her door. It was her maid who informed Her Highness that His Highness the Prince was asking to see her. The girl thought that perhaps this was exactly what she had foreseen. This was something that was bound to happen and corresponded to the plot of the book she had read. She sat proudly on her bed, preparing herself for her brother's visit, and then ordered the maid to ask him to come in. Her brother was the man who would become the future emperor of their country, just the main supporting character of the novel and her half-younger brother, and he was destined to become the emperor. An immoral man who took over the imperial throne by killing his predecessor, despite having a handsome appearance and a good-natured, impeccable appearance. He was a man who was capable of committing any crime, including killing a person, even the closest to him. He had a truly heartless nature. Perhaps all his problems were due to the fact that he grew up alone all his childhood. The boy did not receive a drop of love from the late emperor. Perhaps all this embittered him and made him a moral monster. That is why it was probably not surprising that such a person became a tyrant. He did whatever he wanted without paying attention to those around him and seeing no obstacles to achieving his goals. He was a starved child who had never known affection, and therefore he could not treat others with mercy. When he entered, he asked his sister how she was feeling. She replied that her health seemed to be improving. She was ready to get up and take a short walk. It seemed that the young man was even a little surprised. Apparently, he did not expect that she would get worse so quickly, or he hoped that she would remain lying in her bed. The prince sat down on her bed next to his sister and began to look closely at her face. It seemed to him that it had lost its former color. He told her that he was very glad that she was already better and felt relieved. The princess looked closely at her brother and noted to herself that until this moment she seemed to have been blind and did not notice. But now she began to understand how hypocritical the prince's attitude towards his sister was. She asked his forgiveness for causing him to worry unnecessarily and added that he was incredibly busy, so she hoped that he had not come here for that reason, not because he was forced to do so. The prince asked her not to say that. He continued to stare at his sister's face. He couldn't believe that this was really the girl he remembered. He noticed that she had become very different from her usual self. He saw his sister in front of him and could not understand her. He would not have been surprised, having already heard the question 10 times about when the criminal would be caught. He remembered well her chatty mouth, which never stopped chattering, and her expression. But now something was wrong. He looked at the princess again and finally decided that he must be imagining things because she was sick, and perhaps he shouldn't imagine things that weren't there. The prince decided that everything was as it should be. He was just imagining things. He knew that his sister was incredibly beautiful, but God had deprived her of everything else. He hugged her and thought that she was a completely useless doll. Then he told her to be sure that he would catch the man who tried to poison her with his own hands and make him pay for it. He looked her in the eyes again with his icy gaze and once again asked his sister not to worry too much about anything. Pressed against his shoulder, the girl wondered if the young man really considered her a doll that could be used for the sake of his crown and no one else. It was at this moment that she decided to act. The girl slightly pushed her brother away from her with her hands and asked him to stop looking for the criminal. When he asked her the reason, she replied that she was not ready to do so, but she felt that the criminal would eventually give himself away. The prince looked at the girl again and, as before, did not understand what had happened to her recently. Her behavior and conversations were completely inconsistent with the fool he remembered her as before the poisoning. The young man couldn't just keep quiet and only got angry. He shouted at her, asking what she was talking about. The criminal must be found because she almost died. The princess replied that it was absolutely true. She almost died. The girl looked at her stepbrother sitting in front of her and thought that she almost died because of him. She knew perfectly well that it was the young man sitting in front of her who had slipped her the poison and who had wanted her dead, but to his chagrin had been unable to kill her. He repeated his question again, why he should stop searching for the criminal. The young man wondered if she was saying this because she was afraid of retribution. If that was the case, then she shouldn't worry, because he was ready to do everything to ensure that something like this never happened again. She decided that now was the time to tell the young man what she thought about this, and she asked him if perhaps he wanted to set someone up with his actions. While he was pondering the answer to the question, the princess carefully watched her half-brother's face. She knew that there was a man who was extremely obsessed with her. Perhaps he had decided to execute Viscount Killian's son and destroy their line, precisely because he was a vassal of the Duchy of Kidri, and in her opinion, it was a good choice. Rezef wanted to reduce the influence of the Kidri family, which was an obstacle to his ascension to the throne. That is why he poisoned Cain and staged this whole spectacle. However, this plan turned to dust. It was impossible to trace the poison if it was bought on the black market. Weak evidence will not do here. The girl nervously twirled her fingers and continued to talk. He said that the evidence was there and it was obvious. It would all be over if they were made public. After that, he asked her to make it public and asked if she was really acting like this because of Raffaello. Kidri. She knew from the book that the Duke had been the princess's first and unrequited love, but that was a thing of the past. So she said that it was not so, and that her mother's side of the family had connections in the black market. Kidri Duchy will not stand by and watch their vassals be destroyed. When it becomes known that they are actively involved with the black market, the entire line will immediately fall into decline. After this, her brother Rezef will be suspected of falsifications, which will certainly put him in a difficult position. The Kidri Duchy found out about his falsification, he would be the one who would suffer the most. That's why she couldn't do it. If the county disappeared, she would be in a difficult situation. Then she added that his actions could destroy the duchy and also change his position. That is why she asked not to destroy the duchy. Still holding the hand of her half-brother, who sat next to her on the bed, the princess asked him to make the duchy his support. The young man was stunned by the princess's words. He could not believe what he had just heard from her. It was incomprehensible that she had changed so much after the poisoning. It was the same stepsister sitting in front of him, but it seemed to the young man that this couldn't be true. He had the feeling that there was an adult in front of him, scolding a child for a bad joke. Then the sister remembered something and said that she wanted to take the chance and make the daughter of a trustworthy clan one of her maids. It was a person with certain personal data who could not cause her any harm. She asked her brother what he would say about Lady Olivia. Grays. This was a girl who was personally supported by the duchy itself, and it was her family that they could make their vassals. He wondered what his half-sister was thinking about now, who she was currently occupied with, because she usually took any support from the Duchess with hostility. She was the main character of the original novel and the woman Rezef would later fall in love with. And this time, he would also want to possess Olivia, and would later decide to kill her because she would prefer Raffaello to him. The prince thought about her proposal and then asked the girl if everything would really be okay if they decided to do as she suggested. She hastened to assure him that everything would be just like that. But for some time, she would have to act differently than she would find convenient. The prince looked again at the young lady sitting in front of him and wondered if this was really the same Kana Hill, whom he knows, and then asked her what she was thinking about. But the princess continued to look at the young man with affection without answering his question. Then, with a deft movement, she jumped off her bed and approached the prince. She knelt before him, kissed his hand, and said, turning to him, "My king." He hadn't expected this from her at all. He suddenly thought that his half-sister had completely gone crazy since she began to do such incredible things. He tried to push her away from him, grabbing the girl by the shoulders and indignantly shouted at her that she shouldn't do something like that. But she pressed her lips to his hand again without letting go, and said that she only had her brother. The young prince couldn't understand what was happening. The indignation inside him was growing, but at the same time it seemed to him that this situation reminded him of something. And then Rezef remembered that he had already heard these exact words from his sister. She often repeated that she had no one but him. "You are my little brother and my only family." These are the words she always said to the prince. And if before these words always made him happy, now it seemed he was only upset by what he heard. A crooked smile appeared on his lips, which showed how unpleasant all this was for him. He then asked the girl to stop and pulled his hand out of hers. The prince sat before his half-sister, haunted by the thought that she had definitely gone mad. He trembled and wondered if the shock of the poison had been so great. The young man clenched his fists and asked her impatiently what she had in mind and what all her actions and words meant. The princess stood motionless, as if considering her answer, her hand remaining pressed to her chin. Then, apparently having come to some thought, she looked intently into the prince's face and asked him if he trusted her. The prince was forced to listen to a couple of unpleasant questions from her. She asked if he really considered her his sister. She also wondered what he would do when she was no longer useful to him. And so it was not so difficult to imagine her situation. According to the princess, the ideal and safe way to get rid of unnecessary trash would be to give it to her male spouse, who would later be able to benefit her brother. She then added that she very much hoped that she would not be killed by her crazy husband for some misdeed. The girl knew very well that if she was sold again as a wife to Killian, she would meet her end in captivity and enduring all sorts of abuse. She began to walk on the floor and told her brother that she was well aware of her situation. In the same way, he should be well aware of how much she was needed and could be useful to him. He kept his eyes on her throughout their conversation, and when the girl finished, he asked her what she wanted from him in that case. She wondered if she should tell him her true motives. It seemed like the time had not yet come. And besides, she didn't want to show all her cards to him. But then she said she wanted to have the right to do whatever she wanted. The ability to follow her own feelings. She would very much like to have the opportunity to be her own mistress, and most of all, she would like to gain freedom. The young prince was very amused by her words. He laughed loudly and repeated the word, freedom. He could not believe that the princess was ready to give up the pleasure that wealth and fame give. Kana approached him and asked his permission to marry a man she could choose for herself. It seems that this way of putting the question did not surprise the prince at all, and he asked him if she would like to marry Duke Raphael O. She told him that he was mistaken. She did not want to marry the named young man. She would probably make her choice a little later. This again interested the prince, but he noticed that it made no difference to him, and yet he was interested in what she could offer him in that case. It was at this moment that she felt again that something was wrong with her body. She felt some kind of trembling in her body, and it seemed that it refused to listen to her. The girl nervously clutched the fabric of her dress in her hands and thought that she shouldn't lose consciousness. It was still too early. She had to finish the conversation she had started. After this, she told the young man standing before her that if he agreed to all her conditions, she would make him emperor. She said that even without her power, he would inherit the imperial throne. However, what belonged exclusively to him, he would be forced to share with others, especially with the Evans family, who had taken on the role of his strategist. After these words, the stunned prince asked her if his sister could take on the role of strategist and help him become emperor. She caught the sarcasm in his words, but she was not going to back down, and said that she did not require him to believe her right now. But everything she would do was truly for her brother. And again, after these words, she felt that her body began to feel unwell. The trembling became stronger and stronger, and it was difficult for her to speak. It seemed that the prince also noticed that something was wrong with her. He looked at her and decided to hug her, touching her forehead with his lips. He knew without words that his sister was not feeling well. Her face was purple and sweat was pouring down it. The young prince was very frightened by what had happened to his sister. He noticed that she was all ablaze. He could not understand why her body had become so ill. The girl stopped responding to his words. After she lost consciousness, the young man managed to pick up the princess in his arms, sat down next to her, and began to shout loudly, demanding that a doctor be called to her. The princess heard the doctor being called to help her, but she no longer cared. Her eyes began to close, and she felt as if she was dying again. With her last strength, she tried to do something and raised her hands up. It was unclear what she wanted to do, but the next moment her hand pressed against the cheek of the young man leaning over her, and the girl said only one phrase to him. "Good boy." It was after these words that the princess closed her eyes and froze in oblivion, losing consciousness. The prince sat at his desk, pen in hand. He said that the investigation into the attempted poisoning of Cain needed to be reopened. The prince then ordered that from among the ruined aristocracy, they should select those who would willingly go to the guillotine, as well as those who needed money and were forced to support one of their relatives. After he had been promised that this would be done, he ordered that observers be placed around the princess and that they should report on all the actions of his half-sister. The young prince's advisor thought that it was the first time he saw his prince in such a mood, and the prince also asked him to find out more about Olivia. Grace. After his advisor had said that everything was clear to him and asked his permission to take his leave, the prince began to think. Until now, he believed that his half-sister was completely in his power. And now it turns out that all this time the princess was just playing with him. But then, remembering her, the young man decided that the princess could not be so smart. Perhaps all this was because she had some kind of advisor. The prince began to tap the table nervously with his index finger. He thought that perhaps it was someone from the county of Hamel, but then decided that they had no reason for this. The current heirs to the throne are Rizef and Kaina. Besides them, there is another contender for the imperial throne, Archduke Esther. Henrich. This archduke's family is related by blood to the mistress of the previous emperor, but the succession to the throne was not recognized in the temple, so such a relationship has no right of succession. And besides, this family is inherited by an incurable disease, and this family does not cause any concern. This was until one day an aristocrat from the outskirts appeared, standing at the head of an authoritative force called the Gang of Bandits. He was the adopted son of the Duke. After that, the situation changed radically. Having destroyed the reputation of the current emperor's mistress, he took this woman as his hostage. Then, by threatening the emperor, he forced him to recognize his family, from which the mistress of the previous emperor was a direct relative of the imperial family. Thus, he received into his own hands the right to inherit the throne. The young prince thought about it. He decided that with only troops at his disposal, he was going to use his own sister to be able to restrain the Archduke's adopted son. He remembered the princess's recent behavior again. There were no longer empty eyes that sought only pleasure, but there was an aura that could not be forgotten. But what struck the young man even more was her gaze. It chilled his soul. Her eyes were blue and looked straight into his eyes. He also remembered the girl's hand reaching out to stroke the prince's cheek. This was quite unusual for him. The young man could not decide what to do with the princess. He, who had previously considered her a stupid and beautiful doll, began to understand that perhaps she was not. The man taken into custody stated that he acted in this way only because he loved her too much. The knight who held him in custody said that such a statement seemed rather unexpected and asked if there had been a man like him at the ball. The accused said that even death could not change his feelings for the princess. He added that the princess was said to be seriously ill. The princess's maid came into her room and told Her Highness that the person responsible for the attempted poisoning had been arrested and asked if she would like to watch the execution scheduled for that day. The girl replied that she had no need for it at all and thought that the prince had done as she thought. Half a month had passed since the latest events. She needed time to recover, but besides everything else, she sat quietly for a long time, trying to calm her stepbrother's wariness. At this time, everyone was talking about him. According to them, he caught the criminal incredibly quickly. Although he was very young, everyone asked why he was not granted the title of Crown Prince. Others said that the right of succession was only possessed by His Highness the Prince, and said that it was impossible to decide this so rashly. After all these events, the position of Archduke Heinrich became precarious due to the activity of Prince Rezef. Those who supported him insisted that they had to do whatever it took to prevent Rezef from getting the support he needed. They had to make him focus his eyes and ears elsewhere. At the same time, articles about Cana appeared in the society columns. It was then that the influence of the Archduke's authority, who had become too hasty in his affairs, increased. Rumors of the princess's beauty spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. She was called a rose with poisonous thorns and a beauty that called for death. The maid of honor who came to the princess told her that the aristocrats were already eagerly awaiting the coming-of-age ceremony of Her Highness, and added that, finally, very soon she would be able to meet her fiancé. When she asked the princess if she liked Duke K. Idri as a betrothed, she answered vaguely that who knows. She decided that there were spies all around, and this answer would reach her brother's ears. Father Emperor will hardly be happy about this, so be that as it may, the choice should not be difficult, and will definitely reach the Emperor. The princess said that if Sir Kidri became the husband of the Emperor's daughter, there might be some problems in the power structure. The lady-in-waiting was stunned by her mistress's words. She could not believe that Her Highness would say something like that. Although the conflicting relationship between the Empire and the Duchy is no secret, no one knows what led to their relationship being what it is now. The princess thought of her potential groom as entering the palace as if it were his own home. The Duke was also nervous because he had been dragged into the imperial palace for some reason. The girl thought that in a similar situation, Her Highness Princess Kine was in love with the head of the Raffaello clan, and this was a complete headache for the Emperor. When the girl told him that in any case, His Majesty thought that this matter was really important, and therefore listened to the Duke, the princess realized that he was not caring about her, but was trying to humiliate the Duke by reducing the arrogance of his family. The princess got up from her bed and said that she didn't know her father's intentions, and had only been stubborn in vain until now. So now she doesn't even know where to look out of shame. That's why she needs to put everything in order now, what she's done so far. She ordered the dress room to be opened immediately and put on one of her beautiful dresses. Soon a ball will be held at the Emperor's palace in honor of Cana's coming-of-age ceremony. All the preparations took quite a long time, so the necessary dresses were completely finished. When she appeared at court, she began to listen to compliments addressed to her. They said that she was just like a doll. They noted that the embroidery of roses was not excessive and everything was as it should be. One of the ladies added that there was no one more beautiful in the ballroom than Her Highness. She considered all their words artificial, natural, and straightforward compliments. Perhaps the former princess liked exactly such ones the most. Behind the women who were complimenting the princess, her maid of honor stood and did not understand what had happened to her mistress. Her face showed concern for the princess because she had absolutely no reaction to the compliments that she usually liked. The girl began to observe the lady and noticed that she had completely changed after the attempted poisoning. And it seemed that there was no one except her who could feel it. She thought for a moment and concluded that everyone liked that Her Highness had become calmer. But as it seemed to her, she had certainly not become simpler. She remembered her mistress's eyes and realized that they were different from those before the assassination attempt. There was a certain sparkle in them, and she could not help but notice the presence of intelligence in them. This girl's name was Belle A. She was quite sharp-eyed and quick-witted. She also had ambition. And among the many ladies-in-waiting, she was the only one who was worth something. All of the princess's maids were under the authority of her half-brother. In the hopes that they would catch his eye, the girls would turn their backs on the princess at any moment just to stand out. It was to this girl that the princess turned and said that she would give her a chance, and advised her to think carefully whether she was suitable for her as a mistress. She understood that in order to live a life in which no one would interfere with her, she had to get as many people as possible on her side, be it people, power, or property. The princess, who had lived her entire life in a birdcage, had nothing of her own and was nothing more than a puppet doll. She merely lived as a puppet or figure in someone else's hand and could not realize who actually held the power in her hands. The princess thought that she had been very much mistaken for some time in thinking that it was all hers. She clenched her hand into a fist and decided that she now knew too much to continue living in this illusion. She decided to get ready and thought that she was not going to make the same mistake twice and would live the way she wanted. The princess ordered everything to be prepared, as she needed to go to an audience with His Majesty the Emperor. The princess decided to go to her father's palace. He immediately amazed anyone who entered these magnificent chambers with his luxury. Her father had been very ill lately. The emperor rarely left his bed. As soon as his daughter entered, he said that it was very unusual that she had decided to come to him first. The girl answered him that because of her, a lot of unpleasant things had happened recently, and now she really wanted to sincerely apologize for causing so much trouble to her father, the emperor. She continued to look at her father, waiting for a reaction to the words that her half-brother had taken good care of the poisoning incident, and therefore there was nothing more to worry about. She saw that her father was very worried, but it was impossible to allow him to suspect the prince. Her father considered her a daughter of no particular intelligence and, moreover, very pitiful. Her father never really thought much of her, considering her empty and reckless, and naturally, given this situation, they were not close. The father emperor suspected that it was the prince who poisoned his daughter, but he decided not to remember anything about it, and asked his daughter that if she wanted to catch the real criminal, he could help with this. The princess took her father by the hand and said that everything that had happened was a mere trifle, and she thought it was better to leave everything as it was. She added that all this time she had been a stupid daughter and now she really wanted to improve. His daughter began to smile sweetly and told him that Rezef was still just a child, and it was better to consider this incident a cute misunderstanding. The emperor looked at his daughter carefully. He couldn't understand that even though she knew who was doing this, she was still behaving this way. It seemed that the rumors about her changing were true. Her father told her that the child of a ruler should be forgiven for all this, because these were the corresponding innate skills, and he said that he wanted to reward his daughter. Then he turned to her again and informed her that there was very little time left before her coming-of-age ceremony, and it was time for her to start looking for a betrothed. Raffaello popped into the princess's head as if out of habit, and she could do nothing about it. But in any case, she considered herself no match for him. She only needed the power of his duchy. The daughter asked the emperor if he had any son of noble birth in mind. He was very surprised by her question, since his daughter was so obsessed with Duke Raffaello, and now it turns out she is still ready to marry someone else. Kaina replied that she was a princess and could not be guided only by her feelings. Her duty was to follow the will of her father. Once again, the emperor was surprised by his daughter's answer. He again noted that she had suddenly become mature and wise for her age. He told her that she continued to surprise him. He added that the choice of a partner for the princess must be approached responsibly, which is why he will carefully consider the options. She thanked His Majesty and took her leave. When the servant brought the emperor his tea, he told him that it seemed that time had done its job, and his beloved daughter had finally come to her senses. He said that she had changed so much that he didn't think that the pathetic daughter would be able to cover for her half-brother sensibly. And while the princess continued her way along the corridor of her father's palace, he said that he had not at all expected that she would suddenly become interested in this question of marriage. There was only one thing he couldn't understand. Could his daughter have changed so much that she stopped loving Raffaello? Raffaello Kidri. Black hair and scarlet eyes, symbolizing his belonging to the Kidri dukedom. His tenacity and courage were instilled in him from an early age on the battlefield. It was these qualities that easily won the hearts of the noblewomen, including the princess. When she left the emperor's chambers, he bowed to her and greeted her. The girl began to examine him and thought, "So this is what a man looks like, who is adored by everyone, just as she adored him in the past." The princess told him to get up and said that she had not seen Sir Kidri for a long time. He wondered why she did not call him Afi as before. She asked the duke if he had come to see His Majesty. The young man replied that this was precisely why he had come to the palace, but he was told that it was now time for His Majesty's lunchtime nap and was told to come back later. Their conversation was followed by the nobles present. They noticed that the princess had just left her father's bedroom, and as expected, he was clearly continuing to ignore the duke. The girl thought that her father was avoiding him, and then she came out of the bedchamber. She turned to those talking and asked them to speak more quietly. The duke bowed to her again and said that he did not dare to disturb His Imperial Majesty's rest any longer, and therefore would come some other time. The girl decided that it was time to end the conversation with the duke and began to walk past him towards her rooms. Already behind his back, she suddenly, for some reason, turned to the young man and told him that she knew what had brought him to the emperor. The young man was momentarily speechless. He could not understand how she knew why he needed an audience. The princess told him that she was not sure that she could help the Duke. But since they had not seen each other for so long, would he like to have tea with her? The Duke looked back at the princess and suddenly wondered if she knew that he wanted to avoid pressure from his family regarding his upcoming marriage. The Duke decided to go visit his hospitable hostess. She told him that they had just received some good tea and he would have to try it. He thought about how the princess could help him. It seemed to him that this was not the princess who always bothered him to get his attention. The young man thought that he was now communicating with some kind of negotiator or simply an intriguer. It seemed to him that she was completely different from the girl who constantly reminded him, who had bothered him before. Something new appeared in her. When she looked at the Duke, he even felt a little uneasy. He was especially alarmed by this meaningful look, as if she knew everything. After all, the young man had nothing to lose. It looked interesting, and he decided that it was worth listening to the princess who was offering him a conversation. He looked at the girl again and said that he would gladly accept Her Highness's invitation. After this, he bowed again before his mistress, thinking that the conversation would not be at all superfluous, and perhaps he would be able to learn something new. Thus, the Duke found himself a guest in the chambers of the young princess. They decided to have tea in the glass-covered living room. The guest's appearance was no secret to the maids wandering around. They looked out the window and said that Duke Raffaello had come to the princess's palace again, and he was still as stately as ever. They whispered that the young people had not seen each other for a long time. Their mistress immediately interrupted the conversation of her maids and ordered that luxurious dresses and shoes be quickly brought to her. But then she seemed to change her mind and stopped the girls. She said that she had no need to dress up and ordered them to bring something comfortable. While the princess was changing, the table was set in her living room. In addition to tea, there were various pastries and cakes. After some time, the girl entered the room, clicking her high heels on the floor. The Duke sat with his back to the entrance to the room and therefore did not notice her entering, but he heard the sound of footsteps approaching him. The moment the young man turned around and saw the princess, he was very surprised. Previously, she always dressed up for meetings with him. But this time, for some reason, she dressed very simply. It was as if he saw the girl again. Although her outfit was not bright, there was still sophistication and attractiveness. The princess apologized for the wait. His surprise knew no bounds. The princess did not dress up or flirt as she usually did in such situations, but he wanted to understand why she seemed so beautiful and imposing now. The man nervously clenched his fist, thinking that it was none of his business, and replied to Her Highness that it was nothing to worry about, and that he was not at all tired of waiting. He kept his gaze on the princess, who had changed so much since their last meeting. She was just beginning to settle comfortably in her chair. After she had made herself comfortable in it, she sat down, resting her chin on her hands, and invited him to talk about his wedding proposals. The princess said that this was predictable, since he is the heir to the most influential military family, coming immediately after the imperial family. There was something new about this girl. She said that it seemed that Sir Raffaello was against the wedding for some reason, and added that this was only her assumption. She thought that she couldn't tell the man that she knew about his mysophobia. Also because in the novel, this fact was known only to his closest people. To gain the approval of the vassals as the next duke, either the simplest thing is marriage or proof of worthy skills. She looked again at the Duke and asked him if he had not come here to obtain from His Majesty the right to military affairs and thereby testify to his abilities. She knew that the Duke's parents were currently in the middle of divorce proceedings. This happened because of his father's long-standing affair with one of the ladies of the court. The Duke's mother, worried about this, decided that when her son grew up and inherited the title of Duke, he would definitely follow in his father's footsteps, starting to lead a dissolute life. This is where the problems begin. A rumor spread among the nobles that Raffaello was not interested in the opposite sex, so there was no chance of an heir. The vassals were against this state of affairs. In 23 years of his life, he never even touched a woman's hand. Of course, this seemed abnormal to those around him, but the truth was completely different. It was all because of his mysophobia, which was close to a mental illness. He feels no affection or love for anyone. He is disgusted by any touch. And this is all because of his mental illness. Simply, the mother, who does not know about this, is in a great hurry to marry her son. Raffaello only wants to achieve the title. He really wants this to happen not through the marriage he hates so much. He decided to get the title by proving his skills in other areas of activity. The Duke replied that he was surprised by the princess's knowledge. He wondered where she had learned all this. He said that she was right, and that he had not been able to meet His Majesty. When the princess said that he did not need it and promised to help him solve this problem, the Duke became interested in how she would do it, and he asked her about it. He did not receive an answer immediately because the girl asked him to wait a second and asked her maid if they had brought everything she had ordered. When she was told that everything was already prepared, she began pouring tea into cups. The subsequent events again surprised the Duke, as the princess told him that the tea was very strong, and so she decided to add milk and sugar to it. He couldn't understand why the princess had changed so much. Her appearance, her choice of clothes, her behavior with others, and in addition, her gastronomic tastes had changed. Without expecting anything, the princess immediately began to drink tea with milk and sugar from her cup. The young man looked at her with a look that seemed to demand an immediate answer. His face expressed extreme curiosity. The princess decided not to test it and told him that it was a special tea that she sometimes drank. It helps to satisfy her hunger when she has to skip meals due to a heavy workload. She added that it tasted quite good, then began stirring the tea with a spoon and held the cup out in the direction of her guest. While the young man was drinking tea, he thought that the princess always prepared gifts based only on her preferences. So there was absolutely nothing new here. The Duke had never heard or seen milk added to tea. He hoped he would be able to swallow it, but he had not expected such an effect. His hospitable hostess watched the Duke with interest. She asked him how he rated the taste of this tea. The Duke said it was delicious and added that it was so delicious that he wanted to ask for more, if it would not be too rude of him. The girl said that if he liked it so much, she would definitely give him the recipe before he left, and added that he could feel free to add more tea to his cup. The man thanked her, and after pouring the tea, he touched his cup again, wanting to enjoy this divine, in his opinion, drink. He found it a rather unusual sensation. He couldn't understand why it was happening and wondered if he had ever felt so good about anything. While he was enjoying his tea, the girl was brought some kind of scroll wrapped in ribbon. The princess immediately turned him around and told the Duke that since they had satisfied his hunger, and he had certainly not eaten anything yet due to his busy schedule, they could do other things. She then looked into the scroll and told the young man that they should discuss marriage candidates and choose the girl who could later become his wife. The Duke remembered that a very similar conversation had taken place with him recently. It had been in his family mansion one late evening. He returned home late in the evening, knowing that no one was expecting him there. He had been at a party with his friends and had therefore stayed longer than usual. But his maid was not asleep at that time, but was waiting for her master to arrive. She took his cloak and was preparing to answer her master whether everything was all right with them. But the girl did not have time to answer because, as it turned out, the Duke had a guest. She said that he was late and she had to wait a very long time for her son. He greeted his mother and asked her if she should not now be somewhere in the western lands of their duchy, and asked what brought her to the capital. The Duchess replied to her son that she had much more important things to do than visit the outskirts of their duchy. She was very worried about her son, and that was why she had decided to come to the capital. She would very much like to discuss something with him. After this, the elderly woman noticed that her son was still talking to her in the same cold tone. She decided to ask him if he would offer her a cup of tea. The young man grabbed his head and decided that he would not be able to avoid this, probably unpleasant conversation. He ordered tea and some other snacks to be served. When the maid was about to leave and carry out his order, he added that something else needed to be brought and asked for more strong tea and milk with sugar. On hearing this, his mother asked her son what had happened to him. She could not remember him ever liking milk. The Duke replied that from today on he probably liked it, and thought about how the young lady who treated him to it had changed recently. The Duchess was also thinking. Her thoughts were occupied with why her son, suddenly wanted milk, and who could have changed his taste so much today. While they were waiting for the treat, the woman told the Duke that his household was in complete disarray because he had no wife, and asked what people would say about it. Her son asked the Duchess if this was why she had come to him, since they had already discussed this many times and still could not come to a consensus. The woman confirmed that she had come specifically on the issue of her son's marriage, and added that she could no longer tolerate his indecisiveness. The young man was forced to listen to his mother. She had prepared a whole list of suitable candidates for his wife. It seemed that she had worked hard on this recently. The first of the girls introduced was Lady Dolores, from the county of Ivon. She plays the piano beautifully and is good at embroidery. The princess sitting in front of the Duke said that this person faints at the sight of blood, so she will have a very hard time as the mistress of a military family. Moreover, the county is currently on the verge of bankruptcy due to debts, and most likely it will soon be absorbed. The next to be chosen by both was Lady Rit, of the Viscountcy Brucken. As a mistress training a knight, she would fit well into their warrior lineage. But according to the princess, this candidate also had her shortcomings. She lacked the knowledge and wisdom to rule a large family. Moreover, she had a hereditary disease, insanity. And now everyone is whispering in the corners, but soon it will become known in secular circles. And the last contender for the hand and heart of the young duke was Lady Olivia from the Viscountcy Grace. Her house was supported by the duke's family, so she was well known to him. She is a shrewd and sensible girl. After the man asked the princess if she wanted to recommend her to him as a wife, she replied that she did. This girl was steadfast and beautiful, so much so that there was nothing to find fault with, and they would become a wonderful couple. The duke was still looking for some approach and did not understand what advantages she was seeking from his union with this lady. She told him that she wanted the duke not to forget that it was she who had facilitated their meeting. The young man couldn't understand what was going on. The princess had changed a lot lately. Once she had been pestering him, but now she was busy looking for his future wife. He looked at the girl again and thought that she could not have agreed on this matter with his mother beforehand. He felt as if he was under some kind of spell. The duke thought that, on the other hand, if he thought rationally, his mother was right. After all, it would take too much effort to manage the family alone. However, he could not imagine how he would whisper to someone about love, how he would gently and casually touch someone. Such a thing seemed simply impossible to him. His mother looked alarmed after the duke told her that he had said several times that he had no intention of marrying at all. But she called this absurd, since marriage was necessary for their family, and it was impossible to simply say, "I don't want to." It was good that their tea was brought at this time, because after that the passions subsided a little, and the interlocutors calmed down, each thinking about his own things. The young man wondered how she had managed to pick the right moment to talk about suitable brides, and why she had said all this. Sometime later, all the duke's thoughts were occupied with this very thing. He thought that she needed to meet the princess again, and it was for this purpose that he decided to go to the palace. A set table was waiting for him again, and the hostess said that this time she had brought new cookies and bought rare tea leaves. All this was expensive, and she had hesitated for a long time to buy it, but now she could eat as much of it as she wanted, and it was wonderful. The princess's ladies-in-waiting constantly discussed the changes that had occurred to her. They wondered what kind of poison it was that their mistress could change so much. They noticed that even if they served her half-heartedly, she hardly got angry. And if someone was guilty of something, she generously forgave him. It got to the point that they were even grateful to someone for poisoning their mistress, believing that she had become very good-natured. One of these was Lydia Benjamin. Noticing that the girl was chatting, Belle decided to scold her. She said that she was chatting casually without even cleaning the princess's bedroom. It seemed irresponsible since she was her maid. The guilty maid did not even try to be despondent. She said that even Her Highness was not indignant about this, and asked the maid what business it was of hers. Lydia said that she behaves this way because usually only she grovels before the princess, but she is the ideal and adored lady of the respected Benjamin family. She leaned on the table and began to think about how else to object to this upstart who intended to lecture her. And then an unexpected thought came into her head. She said that if she thought about it, it was His Highness the Prince who hired them, not the princess. She told Bella that she seemed to have changed lately too, and it seemed it could not be otherwise, since the princess had been very nice to her, and that was why she did not notice anything. The maid told her that in any case, the prince really needed the support of their families, so His Highness would protect them. And after all, he hired them to restrict his half-sister. She approached Bella and said, "Isn't it enough for them that they will look good in the eyes of His Highness Rezef, who might soon become their new emperor?" All the maids were very afraid of His Highness. Thanks to his order, they appeared here in the role of his sister's maids, and it was he who could severely punish them for this. Lydia told the girl, who was outraged by her words, to her face that it didn't concern her, and there was no point in making a fuss here, since it was very annoying. Belle realized that there was nothing she could do about it, and after the impudent girl told the other maids that they had to go, she also went about her business. She clenched her fists in frustration and thought about these girls. How could they be so stupid and not notice such obvious things? The day turned out to be quite sunny and almost cloudless. The trees and bushes were enjoying the sun's warmth, but the princess's maid was not going to go out like all the other girls. She moved quickly along the corridor of the palace. Her steps became faster and faster. She was indignant at the behavior of these girls. And yet, just recently, she wanted to be in the same boat with such idiots. Belle thought she needed to control herself because she almost got into trouble. Even if she had changed, the princess never forgives anyone for their mistakes. She knew that all the maids here were aiming to marry His Highness, since he was the only prince of the empire. He has refined features, a soft smile, a voice as sweet as honey. With all this, even his only drawback, his character, does not seem like a disadvantage. But she was sure that this was a huge mistake, that his ruthless and cold nature could somehow be melted by love. She thought that this man was quite capable of cruel acts and would not stop until he achieved his goal. He seemed ready to commit murder, but then she decided that all this was nonsense and she needed to know her place. She just wanted to be valuable to someone, and the girl almost ran to tell her mistress the latest news. She didn't care who exactly recognized her. Her mistress put back the book she had recently opened and thought that it was not in Bella's nature to simply look at Lydia and other maids who looked like her. The princess turned to her and said that she was a smart girl, and her wise decision to side with the strongest saved her. This girl was her maid N, who told her about the squabble that had happened quite recently between the girls. It was she who looked into her chambers and said that today Lydia had ordered that the princess's room not be cleaned. Her Highness thanked her maid for her good service and, as a reward for her courage and determination, decided to give her a purse of coins. She thanked the princess in return. Kaina thought about what had happened. The impudent, arrogant, and willful Lydia was exactly the same as in the book. There, too, she behaved very stupidly and reported to the prince about his sister's every move. But this did not save the girl. The prince, whose love she tried so hard to win, did not appreciate her efforts and, in the end, executed her. The princess thought that she should try to prevent this from happening. After all, it would be better if the stupid girl escaped from this hell as soon as possible. The princess decided that this should be done while she could still leave at will, and while she had not yet become a prisoner of this place, like her. In the original book, it all started with rumors about the wedding of Olivia and Raffaello. They are already looking for a spouse for Raffaello, so their meeting is only a matter of time. The princess thought that in that case, she simply had to first of all do exactly that, to bring Olivia closer to herself in advance. The girl took a piece of paper and a pen, then began to write something on it. Olivia comes from a house of loyal vassals of the Duchy of Kidri. But if her half-brother orders her to move to the palace, she will be completely alienated from her home. The princess was determined that she must not allow anything to interfere with the blossoming of this girl's love for the Duke. She continued writing, deciding that this was why the girl should move to the palace by order of the emperor, and not by order of His Highness the Prince. Then the princess finished writing, putting the letter in an envelope. She was sure that no matter how much the Kidri clan fought for supremacy, they could not go against the emperor's order. The maid who came running at her call, having received the order to carry out the princess's mission, immediately said that she would definitely carry it out and promised to rely on her completely. The princess ordered that this letter be delivered to the specified address, and from there it would be passed on to the appropriate recipient. After some time, a terribly agitated maid rushed into the princess's bedroom and informed her that a very urgent matter had arisen. She told her that the princess's half-brother, His Highness the Prince, was now in a complete rage. He began to destroy everything, and because of this, the palace was in complete disarray. The girl had never expected to hear something like that. She hadn't remembered anything like that in the book she had read, and it had really excited her. In the crown prince's room, everything was scattered and broken. It was a complete chaos and disorder. It seemed like he was really furious. The young man's face was covered in blood. He must have accidentally injured himself when he was smashing the furniture and dishes in his room. The princess declared that she was going immediately to her brother's palace, and the first thing she heard there was the sound of breaking glass and the loud cry of her brother, who was shouting that these stupid idiots whom he had done so much for had betrayed him for just a couple of mines. The prince's maids were terribly frightened by his outburst of anger. They were afraid that his anger would then spread to them. Even the guards standing near the palace heard the prince screaming about how some pathetic insect dared to do God knows what. All the courtiers heard the prince shouting that he had been told that he was born from a mistress, and therefore could not be the only contender for the emperor's throne. He could not understand how anyone dared to tell him that Henrik's adopted son and the emperor's illegitimate son were equal. His body was simply shaking. The young man clenched his fists to calm himself down a little. He considered such behavior impudent and defiant. The young man shouted loudly that he was a real member of the imperial family and not some adopted son of the Duke. The prince calmed down a little and promised to kill all those who spoke like that as soon as he became emperor. It seemed that passions gradually subsided. The young man became calm, but still continued to talk to himself in indignation at the refusal of people who dared not recognize his authority. After this, he sent out of the room 2 frightened maids who were only too happy to leave their angry master. Upon meeting them, the princess asked the girls why they all just watched as the prince's chambers turned into a mountain of rubbish. She also asked them what would happen if Rezef got hurt, and then hurried to her half-brother's room. Watching all this from the side, the prince's advisor could not understand when the princess had changed so much and become so cold-blooded. Her stepbrother greeted the girl rather coldly. He did not want to communicate with anyone now, and told her not to dare approach him, but it was hard to stop her. As soon as she entered the room, she quickly began to approach the prince to make sure he was unharmed. This made the prince even more angry. He bared his teeth and repeated that he had ordered her not to come near him, but she didn't even think of listening to orders. The princess approached her half-brother, touched his cheek with her hand, and said that if she didn't come, he would remain alone. Her brother was stunned by his sister's actions, and while he was looking at her closely, she noticed traces of blood on the prince's cheek. She looked closely, trying to see what had happened to His Highness. The princess continued to stroke her brother's cheek. She told him that if she were suddenly gone, he would continue to be alone and called him her dear brother. After that, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There was a cut on her brother's face. The girl told him that he had hurt himself after all. She looked at his wound and said it was mind-boggling, thinking that her half-brother must be in a lot of pain. The princess stroked his cheek and then said that it was wrong to do that to such a beautiful face. It seemed that the young man was very pleased to feel the touch of the young princess's cheek. He asked her to continue and closed his eyes. Then he did something the princess didn't expect from him at all. He took her forearm and hugged it with his hand. Later, he took the girl in his arms and said that he was not a little boy anymore, and she always treated him like a little child. He asked her that he probably looked stupid as hell in that fit of his. The girl was glad that he felt better and calmed down a little. She laughed and asked if his soul had become at least a little calmer. After this, the princess asked to be lowered to the ground and began to stroke the young man's face again in the area of the wound. The prince wanted her to never stop doing this. He felt very comfortable and pleasant from the touch of his water sister. After this, the young people decided to move to one of the other rooms of the palace, where there was no such devastation and where they could talk calmly. But first, she had to get down to business. The princess decided that she would help her brother herself. She had everything she needed for this. She asked if everything was okay and started bandaging the wound. While the girl was bandaging the prince's face, he asked her if she had hurt herself in his room. But she replied that she had not, and that his wounds saddened her much more than her own. She looked at the prince's face again and noted that it was a very large scratch, and he was practically the face of their empire. Then she told him that he could be angry as much as he wanted, but he should not expose himself to danger anymore. The young prince had now calmed down completely and was able to think and act calmly. He asked his sister's forgiveness for not holding back when he learned something unpleasant. She decided that she understood her brother. Henrik must have lured his people away again, and the prince hated it when they were compared to him because of blood ties. That was why he could be angry. No matter how cruel he was still a boy, not even an adult. He was still at the age where he needed the support and love of a guardian, but the emperor, his only parent, hated him. The princess thought again that the prince had only her. She knew that this child still had a chance to change if she cared for him sincerely. After this, the princess stroked the young man's head again and asked him not to worry and to trust only her. But her stepbrother seemed to be interested in something completely different. He told the girl that there would be many impatient people at her coming-of-age ceremony. She hastened to calm him down and told him that the emperor had allowed her to choose a worthy groom on her own, and very soon this news would reach all the aristocrats of the empire. It seems that the princess was very happy about this, because while telling the story, she smiled very mysteriously and slyly. She already imagined how the nobles would act. She decided that in this case, they would think something like this. It is enough to get this stupid princess to my bride, and then the wife, and the imperial throne will also be in my hands. But then the princess smiled slyly at her brother again and told him that she would, alas, be ill that day, and therefore he, supposedly not suspecting anything, should cordially welcome the irritated guests and make friends with them. The young man immediately understood what the princess's idea was. This way, he could gain the support of the nobles, which had recently been taken away from him. This was a very good chance for him to strengthen his position. He understood his own advantage, but he could not understand how his sister could sacrifice herself for this. The prince asked her if she really was going to marry another man. And what about Raffaello then? He asked the question about the Duke again and decided to ask her if she really loved the Duke. The princess thought for a moment and then said that she had certainly desired him. But now it seemed those feelings had passed. From her eyes, the prince saw that the girl was not telling him something and was thinking about something. Then she smiled sweetly again and said that her feelings might change again sometime in the future. She added that the understanding of love becomes blurred over time. The young man thought about her words and realized that these words could never have been said by the princess before he tried to poison her. It seemed that she had become a completely different person, and his sister said that there are no feelings that do not change. Everything is possible, and you can't say that something can never happen. She looked at the flower in the vase in her brother's room and thought that love, just like this plant, has the ability to change over time. It seemed very symbolic that the next minute one of the flowers broke away from the stem and fell on the surface of the table. In the same way, love was no exception. Meanwhile, it was impossible to hide anything in the imperial palace. Rumors were spreading like wildfire, and very soon everyone was talking about Duke K. Idri accepting the portraits of the candidates for marriage. This became the main topic for several days. People were wondering if Her Highness had said anything about it, since she liked the Duke so much, and they were saying that the rumors were indeed true. The young princess was also at the center of gossip. People said that her feelings for the Duke had finally faded, and it seemed would never be restored. The young girls were also discussing another young lady. They thought that perhaps in this case she too had a chance. They were looking at the young girl at that very moment and said that it had become known that Lady Olivia's portrait had also been accepted by the Kidri house. One of the girls at the party approached Olivia and asked her, "Isn't she comfortable here?" The girl replied to the hostess that everything was fine with her, and she was extremely grateful to her for the invitation. She thought that her family was rather ordinary, so she had never been to such receptions before. As soon as the rumor spread that her portrait had been accepted by the Duke, invitations immediately poured in from everywhere, and this girl was no exception. She told Olivia that she heard that she had been lucky and had such a chance. She said that the girl must be very happy about it. Then she added that the princess usually tormented her like this, even over trifles. And if the wedding went well, then it would be just the perfect revenge. She told the girl that she had to somehow feed the younger ones who were starting to starve, and that she, as the eldest daughter, needed to find the best match for marriage. Her words caused the girl to feel sad and her hands to tremble, but she had to show her interlocutor that she had pointed her finger at the sky. She laughed deliberately and declared that she had never thought about anything like that. It seems that her interlocutor did not understand her reaction at all and even regretted her words, because she thought that this time there would be an interesting scandal here. Olivia thought that no one was talking about the fact that she had been invited to take the position of a maid in the princess's palace. She didn't think the princess would want her around. She knew how much she hated her, but the timing was too perfect to be called a coincidence. Immediately after receiving a request from the prince to enter the princess's palace as a maid, the girl received a request from the Kidri Duchy to send a marriage proposal. Everything happened at the same time. It was as if the princess had anticipated the rumors that were coming and had immediately sent a request. However, the girl's family was under the duchy. If she continued to follow the prince's orders, the position of the duke's family would be precarious. It all looked very ambiguous. If there was just one mistake, an outside observer might decide that some kind of collaboration had arisen between the prince and the duke. The girl wondered what the catch was. After all, being a maid in the princess's palace is a very honorable position, and it is incredibly difficult to get. Surely they couldn't just offer her this position out of the kindness of their hearts, practically raising her social status? Suddenly, someone interrupted the young girl's thoughts. Someone called her name, and she was forced to look towards the person calling her. It turned out to be a maid of one of her acquaintances. She said that she had a message for the girl from her mistress. Olivia had not received letters for a long time, and never from this woman. She was very surprised to receive the dispatch. The girl began to examine the envelope and noticed that there was only wax in the place of the envelope seal, but there was no relief from the sender's seal. This meant that the sender clearly wished to remain anonymous. She wondered if there was any reason why she should read a letter from an unknown sender. Seeing the girl's hesitation, the maid turned to her and said that her mistress's guess was correct. And she also ordered the following to be conveyed to the girl if she had any doubts. The person who wrote the letter addressed the girl and stated that she must already have a lot of questions in connection with recent events, and this letter should help you at least a little." Olivia listened attentively to the maid, who added that the writer of the letter had no doubt that the girl would make a wise decision. The maid said that these were her words, a person of high position and secretly handing her the letter at the right moment. The girl had no more doubts, and she quickly opened the envelope and began to read the letter. As it turned out, the one who wrote it was the princess. She believed in the letter that the girl was now quite confused, but waiting was the best way out for her at the moment. She needed to be as quiet as possible, to make sure that all people even forgot about her very existence. The princess also informed her that it would be better, at least for the girl's family, and wrote that she would soon send another request and was waiting for the day of their meeting. Olivia was very surprised by the letter she received. Just think, the princess herself wrote to her. And besides, she would have to receive another request. She couldn't understand what kind of request they were talking about. Wasn't it a request from the prince? Was it some kind of imperial order? Olivia never understood what the princess had in mind. At that time, she was in the imperial palace, plotting yet another intrigue. She was prevented from weaving another conspiracy by a maid who, knocking on the door of the room, told her that Sir Raffaello was again asking for an audience with her. The princess thought that this was the 5th time the Duke had come to her. She decided that she would not receive him this time either, and asked him to tell her that she was feeling unwell and to let him come another day. She decided to find out who her stepbrother was dating now and asked her about it. The girl answered the lady that the prince was currently meeting with Count Dominin. The princess decided to remember who they were talking about and noted to herself that this count was the owner of the sapphire mines. The princess thought that this was happening on her advice because she told her brother to take good advantage of all the candidates flocking to the place of the princess's husband. She gave her brother a great chance to entice them to his side. The maid could not understand what had happened to the princess, because after the news, she immediately began to go somewhere, and so the girl asked where her mistress was heading. The princess told her that she needed to start preparing snacks for His Highness right away. The maid asked why she had not warned her before to do this, and asked what exactly she needed to prepare. When the princess told her that she planned to prepare the snacks herself, the poor maid's eyes almost popped out of her sockets. She couldn't believe that she would cook anything herself, but that's exactly how it turned out. The princess, followed by her maid, came to the kitchen, where she was going to prepare food for the crown prince. The girl took and poured milk into a vessel and began to quickly whisk it. The head cook, as well as his assistants and maids, could not believe their eyes. For the first time, a person of royal blood was cooking something in the kitchen. After that, she asked to bring apples and began to quickly cut them into pieces. The surprise of all those present knew no bounds. They could not believe that this was actually happening. When the girl finished cooking, she breathed a sigh of relief, and everyone present in the kitchen immediately began to compliment her, saying that she was amazing. In the princess's hands was a pie she had baked herself. In her past life, she had cooked for herself for many years, and her mother had baked her own bread. So this was just the tip of the iceberg. When the baking was ready, the cooks and maids asked the princess why she needed 2 pies. She answered them that one pie was for the prince and the other for them, because they worked so hard every day to feed everyone to their fill. She told the head chef that she was nowhere near his skill, but she meant it from the heart. The man told her that they would eat with great joy and that the event would become a family treasure. The princess began to wipe the sweat from her face and asked him to stop praising her, saying that nothing special had happened. And then she said that she needed to take the pastries to the prince. She knew that there would be many maids who would like to catch Rezef's eye, but Bella was not the type to prove her loyalty to her through such a thing. It would be better to set the maids against each other. When she said that one of the maids should bring the treat, one of them screamed louder than anyone else, wanting to be chosen. It was she who said that she would take the pie to the prince. When the girl grabbed the dish of baked goods in her hands to take to the prince, the head cook screamed in horror that they should wait because it was very hot. The girl who grabbed the dishes dropped the dishes from her hands and began to look at them, saying that she had developed blisters. The princess watched carefully what had happened. It seemed that she should take advantage of this situation. The head cook shouted loudly to everyone that they had to be careful. The princess's maid covered the cry frozen in her mouth in horror, but the princess reacted calmly because she knew exactly what she had decided to do at that moment. The girl deliberately put her hand under the dish falling from the maid's hands in order to get burned. The girl who dropped the dishes ran to the princess and began to stretch out her hand to her, wanting to beg her forgiveness. She knelt before her, lay down on the floor, and began to say that she had committed a mortal sin and asked Her Highness to forgive her. Bella, who was standing nearby, screamed that it seemed Lydia had really gone crazy. The princess had already suffered a burn because of her. It would not be enough even if she had her head chopped off for something like that. But the princess asked her not to scream and said that it was she who had been careless, because of which many were scared to death. It was her own fault, because she should have warned that the pie still needed to cool. And although she insisted that she was fine, she was given first aid in a timely manner. So the burn was not serious, and it would have been enough to apply the ointment for a few days. She tried to calm Lydia down, saying that it was just a light burn, but she kept repeating about forgiveness and saying that she was very guilty before her princess. When she told the girl that everyone makes mistakes and she was still young and therefore made a mistake, Belle thought that it was in vain because the guilty girl was the same age as the princess. When everyone had calmed down, the princess told them they were free to go and rest. Since Lydia was in shock, she asked to be accompanied. Her faithful maid asked the princess why she was so magnanimous, since this girl would not even repent for what she had done. It would be better to take this chance to scold her well. But the princess asked the girl how she could forget that her mistress was not showing her generosity out of the kindness of her heart. The princess's maid was surprised by her words that she had been serving her for a long time, and therefore should know that she does not forgive anyone for nothing, but only puts it off to punish later. Her maid could not understand how the princess knew her thoughts. Trembling all over, she wondered if it was so obvious from her face that she thought the princess had some kind of plan. After this, Belle received an order from the lady to take the cake she had baked to His Highness the Prince. The girl went to the prince's office, and his half-sister thought that this was just another test and began to wait for its results. The girl came to the prince's office and said that she brought him an apple pie, personally baked by the princess. The young man could not believe the words of the girl who had come. It was unimaginably difficult for him to imagine that his half-sister had cooked something herself. He took the plate with the pie from her hands and began to examine it, noticing that the treat looked normal and smelled nice. He asked again if his sister had really baked it. After the maid answered the prince in the affirmative, he decided to begin his meal. His advisor shouted at him not to eat so frivolously. He thought that the prince must understand that there was definitely something wrong with this pie. But the young man did not listen to his servant. After eating, he said that he had no appetite, but this pie was very invigorating and delicious. He wondered what kind of taste it was. The princess added something else besides the apple, which the prince liked very much. When the maid informed him that the princess had added some cinnamon to the pie, the prince said that thanks to his sister, he had discovered a new favorite flavor. After that, he decided to wash down the meal with a cup of tea and said that he was almost done with his business and wanted to eat with his sister. He thought that he never knew that his sister had a talent for cooking. It was as if after this meal, the fatigue had been lifted by hand. When he asked the maid what her mistress was doing now, she replied that, frankly speaking, something had happened to the princess in the kitchen. After the girl reported everything that had happened to her master, his eyes gleamed predatorily and he became very angry. He was not going to wait any longer, but began to move quickly towards the palace, where the rooms of the prince and princess's maids were located. He was not going to wait, but decided to personally punish the guilty one. His courtiers followed him. When the prince entered the room, all the maids bowed to him and wondered what could have brought him here, and one of them wondered if it was because of today's incident. The prince entered this room for the first time and began to examine it. He thought that it was an overly luxurious room, and the tea was expensive, and it definitely smelled of his older sister's perfume. The young man noticed that the girls were living in luxury, which was unacceptable for maids because he had never allowed them anything like that. The prince said that people sometimes make stupid decisions, and it is also natural that everyone makes mistakes sometime. Lydia realized that the prince's words were addressed to her and tried to find words of justification for today's misdeed. But the young man was furious and would not listen to her. He said that he hated nothing more than when people crossed the line. His father often told his son that he had no family. Freedom, the things he wanted, he could only get them as a prince. From birth, the boy did nothing but survive. He was ordered not to forget that an illegitimate child could be gotten rid of at any moment. Although, being a prince, he had to be someone significant. He was asked if he wanted the throne and if he wanted to save his life. If so, he had to prove his worth. After this, the boy and the young man were constantly threatened that otherwise he would simply be wiped off the face of the earth. The boy listened to the words of the emperor, who raised Rezef under the slogan, "Everyone should know their place." When the prince grabbed the guilty girl by the forearm, she squealed and told him in horror that she had committed a mortal sin. But the prince's angry expression was terrible. He was not going to listen to anyone and said that he had never heard of a member of the imperial family being burned by a maid. When he asked the girl about it, she replied that she was asking for forgiveness and that she did not want to hurt anyone. Besides, Her Highness said that everything was fine. The prince leaned over the cowering girl and began to shout at her that his sister had been babysitting them, and that they, the impudent ones, had forgotten their place and had done God knows what. He asked Lydia if she would realize her guilt if he cut off her impudent hands. His face was terrible in anger, and his eyes glittered predatorily. The prince asked the girl which hand to start with. The prince's advisor, who was watching all this, thought that he would have to watch bloodshed again, because in such a state, no one would be able to stop their ruler. The young man even covered his eyes with his hand so as not to see what was happening. But then, after a moment, he opened them in surprise. While the young man was about to take out all his anger on the maid, his sister approached him and addressed him by name. She approached the young man holding the maid and, taking him by the hand, asked him to stop. It seemed that the young man did not immediately recognize the princess standing before him. He seemed to have gone blind in the heat of his anger. But then, little by little, his face and eyes began to warm up, and he saw with surprise his older half-sister before him. The princess told him that she was very happy that he was so worried about her. If she had known that he would be so angry, she would have punished Lydia herself in advance. And while the princess stroked his face, he told her that to wound a member of the imperial family was an unforgivable crime. How dare a maid disregard the authority of someone from their family? If she said anything, he would cut off her head himself. Kana told him that he shouldn't worry so much. He shouldn't be so upset because it was just a simple accident. When the maids heard their mistress's words, they were literally dumbfounded. It was so unlike the princess's behavior, who, if someone had done something like this before, would have been ready to punish the culprit herself. The princess smiled at her brother and told him that she had a slight wound and it would heal in just a few days. Then she said that if he had calmed down, they should have a cup of tea. After the princess told the young man that he was frightening her with his concern for her, the prince no longer knew what to think. His gaze expressed the anxiety that had gripped him at that moment. He asked her if he had frightened her, but it seemed like it was just a joke on the girl's part. She laughed and said that she wasn't scared at all. She had no idea why these moments suddenly overlapped. She remembered a very similar situation, when one hand was in the hand of his companion, and it was a joint walk through the imperial palace. It was when she and her brother were still little children and played together in the palace. She had told him then that she was not afraid of him at all. It was their childhood, long since faded even in her memory. The princess thought that in her first life, she seemed to have not existed for the emperor at all. He avoided communicating with her, ignored her, and tried not to notice her. Her brother treated her differently. He only used her to gain his father's throne and then threw the girl away. Now, it seemed, it was a little different. It was the prince who was currently busy bandaging his half-sister's wound. Ka in a thought that this young man was still her younger brother, and his character had not been so terrible from the moment of conception. She thought it was probably because he had grown up under the pressure and neglect of his father, the emperor. He had never been praised. It was as if he had been thrown out of life in advance. The girl believed that the prince who sat down in front of her was just a boy who could not help but grow up to be treacherous in such an environment, without anyone nearby he could rely on. He must have felt just as lonely when they pointed fingers at him, calling him an illegitimate child. She tried to understand this young man and looked at him with love, deciding that if she loved him and cared for him, he would surely change little by little. She asked her brother if he liked the pie. Rezef said he was surprised by how much he liked it. It was so delicious that at one point he even began to doubt that it had actually been prepared by the court chef. The princess said that even without such flattery, she would bake another pie for him, and she was very pleased to hear such a compliment from him. After this, the prince told the maid who was present in the room to order the remaining cake to be brought to him so that he and the princess could enjoy it together in the garden. The maid replied that she would do it immediately and left the prince and princess in the room. The girl decided that she absolutely had to surround the prince with love and care. This was also part of her duties, and if she succeeded in doing this, then perhaps the young man would change. She extended her hand forward and told her brother that he was such a good boy. Then the girl touched her stepbrother's head with this hand and began to stroke him lightly. It seemed that, just like the previous time, he really enjoyed it. He felt as if his soul was beginning to thaw and fill with warmth. And at that moment, the prince thought that he always put the interests of the family first, took on any dirty work for them. But no one praised him as much as his half-sister did. He looked at her face and thought that no one had treated him like a human being. No one had praised him, even when he made Henrik, whom he hated to the teeth, eat sand under his feet. He stretched out his hand to touch the princess's hand and thought that no one had praised him when he achieved what he had worked so hard for, and never before had he felt satisfaction. The young man touched the princess's hand with his lips to kiss it. He decided that he had never felt so at ease with a princess who had previously been a stranger to him. After the kiss, he told the girl that in her presence the prince felt like he could finally catch his breath. As usual, he thought it was his doll, but suddenly he pulled himself up short and told himself that no, she was no longer a doll. The prince looked at his sister and thought that he had been wrong before. She was caring and beautiful. When he told her this, the princess replied that he was telling her nicer and nicer things every time. When they opened the door to leave the room, he thought that this was his only quiet haven in the entire imperial palace. As the young people moved along the corridor of the palace, those around them noticed that the young princess controlled His Highness the Prince with incredible ease. They decided that even he had surrendered to her mercy. And of course, the one person who was watching their walk most worried and concerned about it was the one who thought that his master had submitted to the princess so easily, as if she had become a tamer of predators. The young man thought that Rezef, although he remained a bastard, was suggestible and easy to control. It would have been better for him if the prince had continued to behave insolently and arrogantly. But since it had turned out that way, he had to be especially careful with this girl. After some time, the princess went again to the chamber of her father, the emperor, to visit him and inquire about the well-being of his majesty. As soon as she entered his bedchamber, the emperor immediately asked her how early she was. The girl replied that thanks to his prayers, she felt much better. It seemed that there shouldn't even be a scar left. And besides, the prince often came to her to check on her condition. The emperor told her that they could easily get rid of some wretched Benjamin family, so she had no reason to feel sorry for the guilty girl. The princess answered her father that one must be lenient to those below her. She thought that if she had wanted to punish the maid, her father would have immediately scolded her for being too cruel. Her father said that the maids might seem inferior to her, just looking after her. But only by taming such people well could she consider herself superior to them. When she asked whether they should be tamed as he had done with Chamberlain Rudin, he, who was present at their conversation, said that it was an excessive compliment on the part of the girl. Afterwards, the father said that his chamberlain was the most reliable vassal he had ever had. And the girl assured her father that she would definitely remember his advice. And she planned to hire several new maids anyway. The princess thought that soon all the servants would be replaced as a result of her successful intrigues. But this had to be hidden. Otherwise, the emperor would try to limit her. She began to play her part in front of her father and said that she wanted to hire someone who knew the fashions of the capital. And she also wanted to get rid of her old-fashioned clothes and buy some jewelry. After all, she had not left the palace at all lately, so she was hopelessly out of touch with the current fashion trends. Looking at her father, she added that she had made pudding yesterday. She decided that for now she had better stick to her image of the clueless girl who smiled brightly and did cute things to please her father. The chamberlain, who heard the entire conversation between the father and his daughter, noted that, by the way, the coming-of-age ceremony of Her Highness was to take place very soon. He added that the wedding was also just around the corner, and the princess had no chaperone. This, he thought, was causing some concern. Chaperone. Noble women are taught about married life before marriage by a woman called a chaperone, a nanny. But the princess didn't have her own chaperone. Her nanny, Kay Lorenz Elevan, had been kicked out by the prince long ago, so the position was open. The emperor knew about it and thought that they had no one to take care of the princess's preparations for the wedding for a long time. Unfortunately for him, he was too indifferent. The princess said that a chaperone would have to be found before the coming-of-age ceremony. It was unlikely that anyone would take her under their wing. And besides, there had been so many rumors lately about the disasters that followed hiring a complete stranger as a chaperone. The emperor thought about his daughter's words. Perhaps he had been wrong to support the decision to expel her previous nanny, who had been a childhood friend of the previous empress. He thought that his years were passing and he had very little time left. It all seemed like a mere trifle to him. The princess heard her father tell her that he could not replace all the maids in the princess's palace, but he was still quite capable of calling one nanny for her. The astonished girl learned from the emperor's words that he was rescinding the expulsion of her previous nanny, who would be her chaperone. The princess began to nervously clutch the hem of her dress, thinking that this woman, who was now destined to return to the palace, had once been the only person who had sincerely cared for her in her childhood. She remembered very well her good attitude towards her. She was almost like a mother to her. When she was with her nanny, she felt like an absolutely happy child. And now she couldn't even believe that she would be able to see her again. The girl thought that she could definitely use a person who treated her well and whom she could trust completely. The princess told the emperor that she was very grateful for this decision and believed that Lady Elevan would also be incredibly happy when she could return to the palace and begin her duties as a nanny. After this, the princess decided to take her leave and, having said goodbye to her father, approached the door that led to the corridor of the palace. When she opened this door, she even shuddered and was dumbfounded with surprise, because she saw behind it the man whom she had avoided several times recently. The princess decided that it was a little rude of her to refuse him a private conversation 5 times in a row. She didn't expect at all that this young man would come to her directly. When the princess came very close to the duke, he bowed to her and greeted her highness. She told the duke that she was very glad to see him and asked if he had come to see the emperor. The man took her hand in his gloved hand and said that this was not what he was there for. He looked the princess straight in the face and said that he had come to see her highness Kana. The girl decided that the man was still speaking ambiguously. In the past, she had misunderstood many things because of this manner of speech. She was surprised to hear from the duke that it was just a trifle, but he would ask her to accept her return gift for the last time. And the duke got a package with a gift from somewhere. It was a rare leaf tea that could only be bought at an auction. They said that no matter how much money you had, it was very difficult to get hold of this tea because of the small volumes of production. Hearing his words, the girl became cheerful and said that, judging by the fact that he even prepared a return gift, perhaps her advice helped him. She looked at the duke and said that the weather was fine today. It would be nice to take a little walk in the garden. He agreed with her and asked the princess for permission to take her hand. She seemed to have some idea about it, because the girl told the duke that he didn't have to be like that. And while the princess asked him to follow her into the garden, the young man was still haunted by her last words. He was worried that perhaps she was upset by his last gesture. The garden near the palace was simply incredibly beautiful at this time. The excellent weather also helped to appreciate all the charm of the garden. And while they continued to admire the beautiful vegetation, the princess asked him that it seemed that the duke was not against being left alone with her, which was unexpected for her, since she could again begin to cling to him and bother him as before. The duke replied that he had not hesitated at all when he received the invitation, and for some reason he doubted that the princess would behave in such a way with him. The girl smiled at the man and said that she didn't think he would trust her so easily, but it seemed that he was satisfied with the information she provided about potential brides. She extended her hand and informed him that the other houses she had mentioned that time had already fallen, so that rumors of a possible marriage with one of their daughters should soon die down, and there was only one line left. The princess touched the beautiful scarlet rose with her hand and said that Lady Olivia Grace has a lovely face and a bright mind, and she doesn't recommend her for nothing. She knows that she will make a good bride, but she also decided to tell the duke that Olivia would be appointed as a maid in her palace, and then the duke's family would stop patronizing the girl's house, and their engagement would become extremely suspicious to the public. The princess said that the rumors about the wedding that his mother had so diligently spread would work against her. The duke thought over the princess's words to her, that then even the duchess would not dare to start talking about her son's marriage again for some time. And then the girl summed it up. She said that she congratulated the duke on being freed from the obligation to marry. The young man continued to analyze everything he had heard in his head. He could not understand how the princess had foreseen all these events. He approached the departing princess and said that he wanted to ask her something. He wondered what she had in mind, since she was so happy to help him and was trying to introduce him to Lady Olivia. After all, he thought that she hated her. The princess thought about his question for a moment and then answered that it was so. She really did hate this girl, but now it all seemed so pointless to her. Both the hatred and the dislike, and the envy and the hostility. The duke shuddered at the princess's words. She said that even love seemed meaningless to her. He wondered if it was really true, and her long-term addiction ended, and the princess emptied her heart. But it seemed that the supply of surprises for this day was not yet exhausted, because then the girl said that she had already spoken about it several times, and wanted to take this chance to apologize in a proper manner. The princess turned to face the duke and said that she sincerely asked his forgiveness for her past rudeness, both here and now in the name of Princess Kana. Hill vows that nothing like this will happen again. Raphael was stunned by her words. He could not believe that the princess decided to swear something. He asked her if perhaps she needed something from him, and that was why she was behaving like that. He nervously clenched his hand into a fist and asked what benefit she expected to derive from all this. The princess smiled, thought for a moment, and said that she expected to receive something very valuable. She looked at the young man standing opposite her and said that she would like to gain his trust. He couldn't believe that all these actions that the girl had taken were done just for this. He even asked her again if it was really just a matter of his trust. The princess replied that it was really only a question of perhaps such a small trifle that would be very valuable to her. She told the young man that her giving him advance notice of her marriage candidates was to prove that she was an intriguer worthy of his trust. There must always be a benefit in everything so that someone can be persuaded to do something. A person must actually feel the benefit, whether it is emotional or material benefit. And the man who was standing in front of her now was very much lacking something emotional. A benefit called faith would be very useful. While the Duke was thinking about it, he decided to ask if this meant, in other words, that the princess would need him in the future. Until then, she would test whether he could be trusted. The princess laughed and told him that he was indeed astute as one might expect from Sir Kidri. The Duke could not help but wonder what goals the princess was pursuing if she decided to behave like this. He thought it was probably for the sake of the imperial family or to make the prince an emperor. But if she was doing it for that, then there was no point. Even though his family was the second most influential in the entire empire, that didn't mean anything. The Duke was sure that she would not cooperate with their house to make the prince emperor, since the relationship was too strained for that. He thought that it would be much easier and faster to gather the forces of other families, but the princess chose him. He looked at the girl again and realized that her goal had nothing to do with the throne. And he was again interested in what this matter was. If the princess was so diligently fussing about him, the Duke decided that he had tolerated this girl for too long, so it was hard for him to admit that the current princess would definitely fulfill her promise. The Duke was sure that she would definitely keep her word, and so he told her that he believed her oath. Seeing how hard it was for the man to make this confession, the princess told him not to worry and to be sure that his help would not be to his detriment. The Duke bowed before the princess and said that he understood her words and was ready to fulfill any of her wishes. The princess told him that if they were finished, it was time to return to the palace. She had just started talking about how she needed to go back so as not to give rise to scandalous rumors when she tripped over something under her feet. And the next moment, the princess realized that she might end up lying on the ground. When she had already begun to bend over with her whole body, the Duke's hand reached out after her to prevent the princess from falling. He managed to grab the falling girl and restored her balance. They found themselves standing close to each other. The princess looked closely at the face of the young man standing before her. It was as if she were seeing him for the first time. The Duke looked at the princess's face just as intently. He asked if the girl was okay and advised her to be careful. As soon as she felt that she had come close to the Duke's body, she immediately remembered his illness and pushed the young man away from her with all her strength. The princess thought that he hated touching people, and so she tried her best to keep physical contact with the young man to a minimum. After all, they had barely begun to restore normal relations, and she could not lose points right away. The girl was sure that without the Duke, she would never be able to find a potential husband. The princess turned to the young man to tell him that it was time to return to the palace. Otherwise, rumors about their relationship might start to spread. But when she turned around, she saw that something was wrong with him, because his hand was twitching strangely. And so she asked him what happened to him. The Duke did not take his eyes off his own hand. He did not understand what it was. Or perhaps he imagined it. After all, the princess had just taken his hand. Without taking his eyes off his gloved hand, the Duke told her that the ground was slippery now, and that he would therefore like to offer her his assistance and asked her permission to give her his hand. After that, he looked at his palm again, as if there was something wrong with it. He couldn't understand why there was no pain after he touched the princess. Kaine answered the man that there was no need for that. She could go on her own, and so he should not worry. The Duke's mind was filled with the same thought. He was now sure that he had not imagined anything. Everything had happened exactly as he had thought at first. He remembered how the princess had told him when they met that he didn't have to be like that. The young man remembered very well that recently the princess had been diligently keeping a distance between them, but no one knew that he hated touching. The Duke once again wondered if it was possible to change as drastically as the girl had done, or if perhaps her previous version was just a mask. He thought he was probably just winding himself up. The princess had become so skillful and sensible lately that it was beginning to frighten him. She looked as if she had lived several lives and had acquired the gift of clairvoyance. Finally, he decided that such a thing was, of course, impossible. He said that he understood the princess's words and suggested that they go more slowly, but his companion seemed to have problems. She started shaking and realized that she couldn't walk. She thought that those damn high heels had to be changed and thrown away. The Duke immediately noticed that something was wrong with the princess, as she seemed to be shaking. To avoid her next fall, he quickly approached her, offering her his help. He asked to forgive him for his insolence, but still said that it seemed she needed help, and took the princess by the hand. She seemed to be very shocked by his actions, since she had known about his mysophobia for a long time and knew how hard he was dealing with this illness. As soon as she asked him to let go of her hand, he replied that he would do it after they had passed this road. If she was afraid of rumors, then they would try not to be seen by other people, and it was worth enduring a little, even if it was unpleasant for her. Kana thought that only her companion might be unpleasant about it. But if he was willing to endure it, she would agree to his proposal. The princess said that he could accompany her to the entrance, and after that he again advised her to tread carefully and led the girl in the direction of the palace. Of course, the young people's walk did not go unnoticed in the palace. Many of the inhabitants of the imperial palace pressed their faces to the windows to watch the princess and the duke. When they returned, the maids began to discuss their walk and noticed that for some reason it did not last very long. It did not escape their attention that the young men looked somewhat aloof. The princess seemed a little out of her mind. It seemed to them that there was a distance between the duke and his companion, and they could not understand where this awkwardness came from between them. The maids immediately began to discuss this. They were curious about what had happened, since he had accompanied her when they went out together. They knew that she had refused him an audience 5 times, and apparently the rumors were true. The princess overheard from the maid's conversation that her feelings for the duke had faded, although no one believed it until the very end. She liked that suitable rumors had started, and now she only had to get rid of the duke. She thought it was mean of her to take advantage of this, but the duke had never been much of a tea drinker, so this was a good excuse. The princess said that the walk was over, and she should at least treat her guest to 1 cup of tea. And then she added that she did not dare to detain him any longer, because he probably had a lot of things to do. When the princess told him that he could go free, he was a little taken aback by her words, since she was simply sending him away, and he had specially freed up the whole day for himself before coming here. When he told the princess that he would not mind staying longer, she replied that it was completely unnecessary. But as soon as a good time came for her to return the tea he had given her, she would definitely promise to send him an invitation. The duke realized that he was simply being thrown out. He was forced to agree with this and confirmed that the next time he received an invitation, he would bring more sweets for tea. The conversation of the young people was closely watched by the duke's adjutant named Jeremy. He was interested in how the conversation between his master and the princess would end. The young man thought about it and decided that his thoughts had been confirmed today. His master also found the changes in the princess that had occurred recently suspicious. He looked at the young people at the moment when the duke bowed again before the princess, and thought that he saw his master like this for the first time. The princess couldn't understand the duke's actions. She knew that he had mysophobia and why he decided to torture himself like that. Or maybe the situation was saved by the fact that they were both wearing gloves. He continued to hold her hand, and when she said that there was no need to observe court etiquette so much, the duke replied that it was a great honor for him. At some point, the young man caught himself thinking that this was indeed the case, and he was not lying. When he touched her hand with his lips, he thought that this small and fragile hand surprisingly did not cause him any hostility, which had never happened to him before. When Ka-ine had bothered him before, it had been completely different. He wondered if he was really that intrigued by her unclear motives now. The duke thought that perhaps it was just his imagination, but there was no unpleasant sensation after touching someone else's body. They had always haunted him before and were signs of the duke's serious illness. With this hand he was holding in his palm now, it was different. He held it as long as he could to see if any painful symptoms would appear. The man thought that because of the princess's proud and majestic posture, he had never noticed before how small and fragile she actually was. Then the duke thought about how much power was contained in this seemingly small and fragile body. The princess seemed to notice that something was wrong with him and asked if anything was bothering him. After these words, the duke rose and replied that he was all right and would look forward to her invitation. Ka-ine answered him that she would definitely do it and asked him to drive home carefully. At the moment when the duke was ready to take his leave and say goodbye to his companion, someone distracted the attention of both young people. A young man entered the room where they were now saying goodbye with quick steps and called the girl his sister. The prince who appeared in the room said that they were nowhere to be seen, and because of this he searched the entire palace, but they were in the very place where he did not look. Rezef came very close to the young people, stood between them, and noticed that she was not walking alone, but with Raffaello. At this, the prince chuckled strangely through his nose, and a predatory steel gleam appeared in his eyes. The Duke immediately bowed before the approaching prince and said that he was completely at his service and ready to carry out any of his orders. But the young man quickly told him that he should stop and that there was no need for these obligatory ceremonies. A simple greeting would suffice. He told the Duke that he had come to enjoy afternoon tea with his sister and had not expected to meet him there. The princess looked at her half-brother and thought that he must have come here on purpose when he heard that the Duke was here. Rezef is very concerned that he does not have any fighting power or even knights on his side, which would be useful in the future to obtain his father's throne. At the same time, his rival has several knightly houses under his control, and of course, this forces the prince to hurry. However, even if all these houses were combined, they would not compare to the Duchy of Kidri. It was a military family that guarded the security of the empire and stood guard over the borders of their country. This was a family that raised the strongest and bravest warriors on Earth, ready at any moment to engage in mortal combat with the enemy. All this was the Duchy of Idri. It was this that was very important for the prince in the process of his struggle for succession to the throne. But the duchy was not yet under his control. He had influence over the marquisate. Evans, the empire's greatest breadbasket. The strongest side of this clan was not its army, but its great influence on the economy of the empire. The strongest side of this clan was not its army, but its great influence on the economy of the empire. By cooperating, they could solve each other's problems with the Duke. One side provides troops, the other supplies them with provisions. So it was no surprise that the Duke was a desirable target for the prince. The princess thought that she could not allow this under any circumstances, because the Duke had to help her get out of the palace. When the Duke said that he had just said goodbye to the princess, the young man said that he was very sorry, as it would have been great to spend time together, and added that they should definitely do it sometime in the future. Raphael bowed to the prince and princess, wished them all the best, and went to his house. They did not wait for him to straighten up, and, still standing, the Duke again began to watch the brother and sister of imperial blood. The young man noticed that the prince hugged his sister who was walking next to him, and together they went towards where the princess's rooms were located. He could clearly see the prince's hand, which was holding the girl by her thin waist. The Duke straightened up and began to move towards the exit of the imperial palace. He was haunted by thoughts of today's events, and he analyzed his last conversation with the princess. Lydia in the imperial palace ran out of her room and screamed loudly, addressing her father. She wondered if His Highness had forgiven the girl for her misbehavior in the kitchen. Her father replied that Sir Evans had managed to hush it up. The girl was very happy about this, and she began to thank God for it, and then asked when the Evans family would offer her as a wife to the prince. Her father thought that no one would propose his daughter as a candidate, since they had their own. It would be enough to stick to the role of the prince's hands and feet, continuing to please him. He told his daughter that in order to become the prince's bride, she had to make a good impression. But she managed to make such a serious mistake. The girl screamed indignantly. She expected to become at least a candidate for the prince's wife and declared that she had also burned her hand that time. Her face looked very angry and furious. She shouted to her father that this girl had deliberately put herself under the falling pie. The princess did not say a word about him still being hot and arranged a rivalry between the maids. She arranged all this, having waited for the right moment to pity His Highness the Prince. Since the daughter called the princess a slut, the father immediately rushed to her and demanded that she watch her language. She said that all these scumbags do is neglect her. Now everyone avoids her after the incident with the pie. She began to cry and tell her father that the princess had been strange lately, did not leave the palace, did not hold balls, and the budget was rotting from excess funds. Her father thought it was strange that the prince suddenly began to take such tender care of his sister. This had never happened before. He thought that there was money in the palace, but the princess did not throw balls. This was strange because the coming-of-age ceremony was soon to take place. He had often heard of late that the princess had changed. He thought that perhaps she was up to something. It was strange, this sudden rapprochement with the prince. He wondered if it meant that she was aiming for the regent's place. Lydia told her father that Princess Kaina had become extremely suspicious lately, but her father ordered her to be careful about who she interacts with and who she doesn't. After this, the man ordered his daughter to tell the other maids to check the gifts sent to the princess. After she said goodbye to the princess decided to go to her room and take care of the things that had accumulated in her mind lately. She sat down at her desk and began to do paperwork that she didn't really like, but which she had to do anyway. The first thing she came across was a sheet of paper with a report on the income of their empire and palace for the last few weeks. The girl was surprised to notice in the report that the treasury of their empire was overflowing. Perhaps this happened because she behaved too modestly. She put the sheet of paper on the table in front of her and thought that she deliberately did not arrange any receptions so that the maids would have a lot of free time. She needed them to forget about their place during this time, but she needed a good moment to create another incident. Bella told her that the maids seemed to be looking for something lately, and now she also told the princess that for some reason her tea was late, and said that perhaps she should go and get it. The princess did not hear her question, but to the girl's surprise, she replied that she should do so, and also take some cookies that she had baked. She added that it was not possible to live on snacks alone as it was unhealthy. After some time, a servant appeared at the door and told the princess that the maids had asked her to give her some cookies, and also asked for forgiveness for disturbing her mistress. Bella took the plate of cookies from the maid's hands and pounced on the maid with a question about what the maids were doing now if they had given it to her, and not brought it to the princess's chambers themselves. The maid replied that the maids had explained to her that there would be no harm in taking the treat to the princess herself, since she was there herself. Bella thought that she had been seeing this maid very often lately. Perhaps she was mistaken, but it seemed that she was very often present in the princess's room. And then the girl looked closely at the cookies lying on the plate and shuddered, because she suddenly realized what kind of cookies the girl had brought the princess. Bella thought the maids had gone completely crazy because they were nut cookies. Everyone in the palace knew perfectly well that Her Highness was allergic to nuts, and yet they dared to give the princess these cookies without even checking them first. Kaina asked her maid what happened there. She replied to the princess that she begged Her Highness's apology. There was a problem with the sweets, and she would have to go and prepare some others. But to her surprise, the princess just smiled and said that this couldn't be. She told the girl that there was no need to go anywhere, because these cookies would do. Then the princess stood up from her seat and walked over to the girl to take the plate from her. The maid recoiled from her in horror and said that there were nuts in the cookies. She should not eat them under any circumstances. But the princess, despite all her persuasion, said that everything was right. It was a cookie with nuts, and one cookie would be enough to put her life in danger. But she still took the cookie in her hand. Bella was surprised by the words of her mistress, who said that these were exactly the snacks she needed from the maids. The girl did not understand whether this was serious, the princess tells her. The girl seemed to be teasing her, brought the cookies to her mouth and said that she was going to eat them now. The girl thought that she was going to eat them on purpose. The princess asked her maid if she could handle this task. After all, it wouldn't be difficult at all. She reminded Bella that it was she who had ordered the pie she had baked to be taken to the prince. That is why now she knows nothing about the fact that she was served sweets with nuts, since at this time she will now go to His Highness. And while she is there doing this, the princess, who trusted the other maids, will lose consciousness in her room all alone. The maid who came just recently and whose name is N will report this to the doctor and to Father Emperor. It goes without saying that after some time, exactly the same information will reach the ears of the crown prince. The girl standing in front of the princess was surprised to hear that she, whom the princess treasured so much, knew absolutely nothing about what had happened. Everything happened exactly as the princess described to her favorite maid. After some time, she ate a nut cookie and found herself unconscious in her bed. After the princess lost consciousness, she was put to bed and a doctor was called to her. She took the girl's hand and began to check her pulse. She could not understand how the maids had allowed this to happen and what they were doing. After the initial examination of the patient, the woman said that the princess had eaten very little and therefore should quickly return to normal. She said that these were definitely symptoms of a nut allergy and that she needed to be extremely careful in the future. If something went wrong, it could have ended very badly for the young girl. The prince thanked the doctor and said that she could go free. She bowed and left the princess's chambers. The princess's half-brother stood and pondered what had happened. He thought that for the second time in such a short time, her life had been put in danger again. The young man came to the conclusion that those responsible for what had happened would definitely have to be punished. This is exactly what he was about to do now. He quickly turned on the heels of his shoes and looked towards the maids present. He asked them how they could not check the food intended for the princess. The girls bowed down to their master in fear. He told them that perhaps the cookies had been a pure accident, but he could not understand and asked for an explanation as to why there was no maid with his sister. He demanded an immediate answer from the girls and asked why they continued to remain silent. Rezef repeated his question about why there was no one in the princess's bedroom and no one was watching what she ate. The prince said that earlier because there had been a similar incident in their family, and said that he was talking about the murder of a member of the imperial family, who also had an allergy to nuts. It seemed that the young man was only warming up in this way. Then he drew his sword from its sheath in a rage and shouted that he was talking about the murder of Her Imperial Majesty the princess's mother. The girls, horrified, began to ask the prince for forgiveness. They told him that Lydia Benjamin said that Her Highness was suspicious and ordered all her gifts to be checked. If it weren't for that, they would all be there. And while the girls continued to talk about how Lydia had even threatened to kill them if they disobeyed her, the prince pointed his finger at the aforementioned governess and promised to punish her without fail. The girl thought about how not long ago these girls had been clinging to her, telling her how much they liked her kind. She wasn't going to be the scapegoat for these idiots. She screamed in the prince's face that this was slander and he should not listen to these non-entities. In her opinion, it was a conspiracy, and some spy was trying to challenge the authority of His Highness. The prince came even closer to this governess and asked her to tell him who, in her opinion, was the spy. The young man was terrible in his anger. He said that, according to her words, it turned out that he had been played with all this time, and asked her if she had decided to laugh at him, and called her a spy. The prince's sword rose higher and higher above the ground and approached the young governess's neck. When his blade was close enough to the girl's head, she said that she would never dare to interfere with him in any way, and everything she did was only for him. Rezef's eyes sparkled with a predatory fire. He told the governess that he had told her to know her place, adding that he was always running into some kind of pathetic creatures. When it began to seem to everyone that a bloody scene was about to unfold, everyone present in the room heard the door of the princess's bedroom open slightly, and someone entered with slow, heavy steps. When this man entered the room, his arrival was announced to everyone who was in it. After all, it was His Majesty the Emperor who had arrived. Everyone began to greet him. The young prince also turned towards his father, who had entered and seemed to calm down immediately as soon as he saw the emperor. And at that very moment, the sword he was holding in his hand fell to the floor with a clang. The prince also bowed before the emperor and greeted him. The old man who entered began to closely examine everything that was in this room and all the people present. His gaze also did not escape the sword lying on the floor, which the prince had recently dropped from his hands when he appeared. He looked at the young man who was bowing before him, who began to tremble slightly from the fear that filled him. The emperor thought that his son looked rather pitiful. The emperor immediately called his chamberlain to him, wanting to give him some instructions. His best vassal immediately approached him and bowed before His Majesty. He said that he was entirely at his master's disposal. After thinking for a long time, the emperor ordered him to beat with rods all the maids who were there, and then drive them out of the imperial palace and forbid them from entering the capital. He looked at Bella and said that it did not concern her. The princess treasured this girl very much. She served faithfully, and therefore she should be rewarded with jewels. Turning to her, he said that for a while she was entrusted with the management of the princess's palace. While the girl was thanking the emperor for his favor, he added that after this it should be announced to everyone that the imperial palace was holding a selection for the princess's maids. The emperor looked at the body of his daughter, who was now lying unconscious in bed. He thought that the princess must be going through a rough patch in her life, since so many troubles had befallen her. He looked at his daughter and thought that after the poisoning, the subsequent burn, and now after the allergy, she was lying unconscious in her bed. The emperor thought that his daughter had steadfastly endured all the trials that had befallen her recently. He looked at the prince present and thought that it was he who was to blame for the poisoning of his half-sister. The man had no doubt about it at all, and was sure that it was the prince's doing. He turned to his son and told him that everyone was silent about this, and therefore he decided that the emperor really did not see what was happening in his country. He told Rezef that until he repents for what he has done, he will face severe punishment. The young man leaned forward, waiting for any decision from his father, and said that he already obeyed him. The emperor said that he would be kept under confinement in his prince's palace. After this, the father emperor ordered everyone to leave this room, since the princess needed a good rest. When he told Bella that he trusted her with his daughter, she promised to serve her princess faithfully. After some time, the room was empty, and the princess's maid locked the front door. Then the girl quickly moved to cover the windows leading to the palace courtyard with a curtain. While there was still a gap between the curtains, she looked out to observe what was happening outside the palace. And finally, the maid turned her head towards her princess and told her that everyone had already left. And at that moment, the princess, as if nothing had happened, opened her eyes, smiled at the girl, and said that she had done her job well and thanked her for it. After the princess told Bella that they needed to talk about something, She agreed with her proposal and said that she was ready to listen to her. Kayan said that she knew that the girl's house was among the prince's supporters, but she must know that all the actions according to which she acts on behalf of the princess are not a betrayal of either the girl's family or the prince himself. The young governess trembled slightly after her mistress's words. She was ready to carry out any of her orders. The princess said that by her actions, the girl, on the contrary, helps Rezef. After all, the princess plans to make the young man an emperor. The princess decided to get up from her bed and swung her legs over the edge. She said that the young prince was not very sensitive. She informed the governess that even if she tried her best, the prince would never care about the position of her family, especially when it came to assigning a title, since it was too troublesome a matter. Belle didn't find an answer to the princess's question about whether she wanted to get a title. The girl only raised her eyebrows in surprise when she heard about it. The princess told the girl that she had run away from her relatives, who were planning to sell her profitably by marrying her off. After she heard rumors that her future husband had immorally planned to make her younger sisters his concubines. Remembering this, the girl began to tremble and clenched her hands into fists. She could not understand how the princess knew all this. The princess informed her that she believed that after receiving the title, the maid was going to take her younger children away from her family, and then added that it was within her power to arrange this. And although after all the words of her mistress, the maid fell on her knees before her and began to ask her to have mercy on her, the princess told her that she should no longer be afraid of anything. She said that the parent of the girl who dares to call himself her father sees his daughters as nothing more than property. She is only 25 years old and too young to take responsibility for her own life and the lives of her younger children. Belle began to cry, and the princess told her that they were not tools for the maintenance of the race. The princess knew that the girl had come to the imperial palace herself anyway to protect them. She was no different from the princess imprisoned here, who was being manipulated by everyone. She told her maid that they were probably the only ones in the world who could understand each other best. That was why she was going to protect this girl. She stroked the crying maid and promised her that she would always and in everything protect her, because she had already suffered enough. Tears were streaming down the poor maid's face and she couldn't stop them. The girl whispered to her mistress that she would serve her faithfully until her death. She still remained kneeling before the princess and promised her that she would always unquestioningly carry out all her orders and instructions. The princess was delighted to hear this and hastened to tell the girl that she had truly got a reliable maid, and now they should get down to the next business. The princess ordered her maid to bring her the most modest and plain dress she could find in her wardrobe. The maids were discussing the princess. They were saying that everything looked very strange because she hadn't even moved the whole time. And as soon as she woke up and learned about His Highness's punishment, she immediately rushed here. They said that the princess was wearing such an unsightly and shabby dress that she could not even be recognized as a princess. They noticed that she turned out to be such a small and fragile girl. What would happen if she suddenly lost consciousness again? The princess continued to sit on her knees for a long time and pray for forgiveness from her half-brother. The emperor father called the chamberlain to him and asked him how long his daughter had been sitting like that without getting up. He replied that more than 3 hours had already passed since the princess had decided to ask for her brother's forgiveness in this way. The doctor said that if this continued, her condition could worsen. The emperor had no intention of giving in to any emotions or someone's pleas. He decided to punish his son severely, although confinement in his palace was not what the young man deserved for his actions. After some time, a servant ran to him in peace and informed His Majesty that the prince's noble supporters were asking for an audience with him. The emperor said that if you give them a chance, they will immediately take advantage of it and bite off your arm up to the elbow. But he still said to invite the nobles into the hall. The prince's advisor must have been the most senior of these nobles, because he was the one who stood in front and shouted the loudest, asking the emperor for forgiveness for the prince. But their master was not so easily moved to pity. The emperor shouted at them. What right did they have to ask him for pity, and how dare they say such a thing, knowing all that his daughter had gone through? Sir Evans confirmed that indeed His Highness the Prince failed to keep an eye on the maids, and the blame for this lies entirely on his shoulders. But then he added that this was too severe a punishment for such an offense, and began to wave his fists. He bowed low before his emperor and asked him to reconsider his decision. The old emperor thought that a crowd of some influential aristocrats had come to dictate their terms to him. He thought that he really couldn't ignore them, even though he was the ruler. It wasn't that simple. He knew that the power of the crown was directly dependent on the strength of the main aristocrats subordinate to it. However, in his opinion, No one dared to tell him that his sentence was unjust. He thought that the aristocrats had lost all fear of the setting sun of the empire, and while the emperor was thinking about how he should act in this situation, someone quietly knocked on the door of the room. The knocker turned out to be the princess's maid. When the chamberlain opened the door for her, she began to whisper something quietly to him. Without a moment's hesitation, the chamberlain approached his master and asked his forgiveness for interrupting the conversation. But he had just been informed that Her Highness the Princess had fainted, and the physician was already with her. Hearing this, the advisor could not believe that the princess was unconscious again. He thought that this was their chance and they needed to put some more pressure on the emperor. He thought about the girl and couldn't understand why the princess behaved like that. It was not like this flighty girl at all. The aristocrats also could not understand why this princess would help them so much. They had been racking their brains for so long about how to get the prince out of his indefinite imprisonment, and the problem resolved itself. Sir Evans wondered if the princess had really done this for His Highness. It was because of this incident that all the maids of the princess's palace were expelled. As a result of all these events, the prince lost all his servants, whom he had chosen for so long and who had served him faithfully for a long time. The prince's authority weakened, and he found himself oppressed by the emperor, who brought down all his wrath on him. The only winner was Princess Kaina. She didn't lose anything from this, and perhaps even gained. No matter how much the young man thought about it, he always came to the conclusion that they had all fallen for the princess's trick. To be honest, he didn't believe her so much that he doubted very much that she had actually eaten the nuts. But now he was grateful to this girl for giving them this chance to free their master from captivity. And although he did not know what the princess had in mind, he decided to take advantage of this and shouted to His Majesty to reconsider his sentence. The emperor remained silent and looked at the aristocrats who had arrived, while they tried not to miss their chance and beg forgiveness for their prince. The old emperor was deep in thought. He took his face with his hand and said that this spectacle of theirs was disgusting to him. After this, the old man said that they should all thank the princess for her efforts. It was thanks to her that he decided to reduce the prince's sentence to 10 days. When the princess came to, she found herself back in her room with her favorite maid. She asked her how she was feeling. While the girl was pouring tea for her mistress, she told her that almost everything was fine with her. She just had a cramp in her legs from sitting on her knees for so long. But for some reason, everyone decided that she had fainted. After that, she told Belle that she felt better and that they could continue their intrigues. The princess said to the maid, who was surprised by her words, that thanks to her she had passed the test of His Majesty. Belle was taken aback by the princess's words. She could not understand what the test consisted of, and thought that the emperor had simply changed his mind. Kaina explained to her that lifelong imprisonment was tantamount to forfeiting the right of succession. Given the character of the emperor's father, if he had really intended to expel the prince, he would not have personally deposed him, but locked him up. The princess took a few more sips of tea and told her subordinate that the emperor had originally planned to punish the prince for 10 days. She smiled at the girl and said that it was just a kind of test. The princess said that all this was done in order to observe how she would solve this problem, and the results of the check will be known to them very soon. The girl couldn't understand what was being discussed. She didn't understand what the test consisted of, and how she would be able to find out about its results. After some time, they heard someone's footsteps in the corridor near the princess's room, and she told the maid that he had already arrived. And indeed, the door of her room opened and a man entered. It was the emperor's chamberlain who announced that he had an imperial order for Her Highness the Princess. The man held in his hands a pillow on which lay a golden key decorated with a precious stone. Upon hearing her father's order, the princess immediately bowed as required by court etiquette. Her maid was amazed by what had happened, and even more so by the fact that her mistress had been able to foresee all this and had told her about it only recently. The bowed girl listened to the emperor's order. The chamberlain began to read the beginning. It sounded like this. First Princess of the Empire, Kaina Hill, listen and pay attention. The chamberlain continued reading. The order stated that since Prince Rezef was in temporary confinement, both girls bowed low to the floor and heard that the prince would not be able to properly look after the ladies-in-waiting for whom he had vouched. Further, the order stated that it was therefore decided to temporarily transfer these powers to the first Princess Kaina, Hill Point. Of course, the princess was satisfied with what had happened, but she did not show it with her eyes, but only said the word, "I obey." After this, the chamberlain asked her permission to leave and received it, as well as gratitude from the young princess. After the man left, the maid could not contain her joy. She declared that her mistress was incredible because she had managed to manage the ladies-in-waiting. and this meant that the emperor recognized her leadership skills. The princess took the key in her hands and thought that, being a princess, she had received a privilege for the first time in her life, even if it was temporary. The key of the maids of honor, which had been in the possession of empresses for generations. The girl became sad, remembering that her mother, the previous empress, was no exception, and also owned this key, which was a symbol of power. She thought about how long it had taken her to get the key into the hands of the paper princess that everyone was just using. The princess was sure that this was only the beginning, and it was definitely not enough for her. She intended to achieve even more rights. She told the maid that since she was so happy with this alone, she couldn't even imagine how amazed she would be by the next plan. And when Belle asked what the next plan would be, the princess told her that they had a lot of things to do. After thinking about it, Cana told her that the first thing that needed to be done was to send a notice on behalf of His Majesty. Olivia Grace will be officially chosen as a maid for the princess's palace. Before this, the girl's family did not accept the prince's request. They did not want to appear as if they supported the prince as a successor. But receiving invitations from the emperor is a completely different matter, and they must definitely agree to it. Firstly, it would not seem like they were taking the prince's side, and secondly, they simply could not refuse the emperor. Having received an invitation, Olivia will voluntarily come to the princess's palace, at least in order to raise the social status of the family. She thought about this girl, who was the main character of this world, the strongest card, and the unfortunate character who was unable to gain anyone's protection. The princess believed that she simply had to win this girl over to her side. She needed to do this to protect her from the prince and the archduke. The princess told her astonished maid that Lady Olivia could safely be entrusted with the position of maid in the princess's palace. Bella asked her what else she planned to do while His Highness was in exile for 10 days. The princess seemed to be in a good mood. She cheerfully replied that she would do what was most natural to her. She clicked her heels vigorously on the floor and decided that she would do what she could get the most benefit from, even if she was ignored. She thought she would do it, even if it was something vile and dangerous. As befits a villain, she decided to sow the seeds of discord. It was for this purpose that she went to the prince's palace, where she was met by His Highness's advisor and greeted before entering the prince's room. The princess quickly approached the young man, who was surrounded by guards who did not allow the prince to leave his chambers. She told the young man that she was too worried about her brother and asked if she could meet him now. The young guard told her that it was impossible, and after that the young man's face turned slightly red. The guards began to stamp their feet, thinking that they could not even allow the older sister to see her brother. But they could do nothing, since the emperor himself had given the order for the imprisonment of his son. And while the guards thought that it was very difficult for them to say that entry into the prince's room was prohibited, the young man's advisor thought that they were blockheads and completely out of their minds. He approached the girl and said that her visit could only cause more problems for the prince. The princess turned out to be a good actress. She worriedly asked the counselors if her brother was okay, because she could not calm down and was constantly thinking about him. Sir Evans told the girl that His Highness was fine, but unfortunately they could not disobey the emperor's order, and so he asked her not to persist. At the time, he thought it was disgusting. He decided not to let them meet at any cost. In his opinion, it was a mismatch, and the princess had certainly planned to gain control of the ladies-in-waiting from the very beginning. He was haunted by the thought of how she dared to come to the prince under the pretext of caring for him. He said that His Highness would not be able to receive the princess. Ka-ina replied that she understood everything and said that she should have thought about it. After all, she had put them in an awkward position in this way. The young man did not know what to answer her. He thought that he should have told her this more gently. He looked in all directions and could not find the right words. His inner voice was telling him that he didn't really enjoy upsetting the princess like that. And if he was a gentleman, he should have tried to please the princess, and not do the opposite. It seems that the young man felt so bad from the emotions that overwhelmed him that the men standing nearby were forced to support him. The princess herself came to his rescue, saying that the young man would like to tell her everything about the prince on the way back. The girl smiled sweetly at the prince's advisor and said that she could ask him for an escort. Sir Evans did not expect such a request from her at all, and therefore began to stutter and stammer, not knowing what to say to the princess. He even began to look around, as if seeking support or advice from the aristocrats standing nearby. But they were just having fun. They were thinking about whether he was going to refuse the princess herself. They decided that this couldn't be, because even Sir Zenon Evans must have common sense. The young man thought that with the princess's reputation, he wouldn't be able to refuse her. And besides, since he was close to the prince, it had to look normal. He approached the princess and told her that it would be a great honor for him. The princess leaned her hand on the man's offered hand, and together they moved towards Her Highness's rooms. She was determined to continue her intrigues. And that was precisely why she needed this man who had escorted her to the princess's palace. Their path had to lie through the palace garden, where at this time there were few people, and no one could interfere with their conversation. The girl began her conversation by asking her companion if she should worry about the prince's health. He answered that this was indeed the case and that no one in the entire empire was healthier than him. He thought he could say that he was even too healthy and cheerful. The prince was so healthy that in 10 days they would definitely have to move him to different rooms 10 times. The princess looked him in the eye and told the young man that he must be having a hard time, and added that if she had been more careful, she would not have had to throw out the maids. The young man smiled at her and thanked her for her concern. He said that it must be hard for her too, as she now had to hire new maids. At the same time, he watched the girl closely, deciding that she was thinking. He did not know that it was she who had set all this up. He was interested in who would now fill the vacant places of the prince's expelled people. Continuing to lean on the young man's arm, the girl said that she just wanted to ask him something. Looking at him, she informed the prince's advisor that she wanted to call people and families that could be trusted, and asked what he would say about his younger sister, Lady Julia Evans. The young man could not understand why she needed this, because she had just thrown out the prince's people and was immediately calling someone from his family. He decided that this was not a bad thing. It might even be extremely good. Julia might be nominated to be the future empress, and if she became the princess's maid, she would often come into contact with the prince, and things would be much easier. Sir Evans continued to look at the princess and wondered what this girl was really planning and why she was giving him such a chance. As if by chance, the girl remarked to him that, by the way, he too was still single. Continuing on her way, she told him that for some reason the eldest son of his house, who owned the largest granary in this country, still did not have a bride. The princess said that with his insight, either no noble lady was suited to his nature, or for him, marriage was only a tool for gaining profit, and there could be no talk of love. A little behind her, the prince's advisor said that he was no longer at the age to talk about love, and he had no desire to force himself to do something that did not interest him at all. His answer seemed to amuse the princess, and she told him that she wanted to ask him something else. The princess playfully and coquettishly turned towards the man accompanying her, and asked him if the role of the husband of the imperial daughter was worth enough for him to be interested in her. When he heard her words, he almost lost his glasses from surprise. It seemed that the princess had just invited her interlocutor to court her and subsequently become her husband. The young man thought it was simply unthinkable. He could not even imagine himself in the role of the emperor's daughter's husband. After all, she had just suggested that he seek her hand. He thought that he had never considered the foolish princess standing before him as a potential wife, but he had to say that the current princess was different. When he looked at the girl again, he decided that she was cautious, insightful, as if she foresaw everything in advance. The man decided that in his relationship with the princess, he would no longer have to grovel before her half-brother, and he thought it looked funny. He decided to let them think that he had fallen for this provocation. For him, the role was definitely worth fighting for. And the girl herself looked attractive. When he kissed the princess's hand, he was confident that he would be able to win this fight. As the tea poured into her cup, the princess thought about her recent walk with her brother's advisor. While waiting for the tea to cool down a bit, she decided that the man was blinded by his skills and arrogance, so it was difficult to manipulate him. But it was his arrogance that would lead to the fire. The princess was thinking about what had happened to Julia Evans, Olivia, and Belle, and she only has 3 maids. She decided that she needed a minimum number of people to instill a sense of privilege in the maids of the princess's palace. The work that the ladies-in-waiting do is divided into 4 types, and separate maids were needed for each. A maid who ensures that duties and discipline are carried out. This requires being especially careful. Therefore, this position will go to Belle A. Receiving guests and managing the process of holding receptions, this place will be given to Olivia. With her innate insight, she will cope perfectly. At the same time, it will strengthen her influence. The maid standing next to her said that there were only 2 maids. So who would take the 2 remaining places? The food maid is responsible for monitoring every meal and medication, and the property maid is responsible for keeping an eye on clothes and belongings. The princess closed her eyes slightly and told the girl that she also had candidates for these places. She told her that the other 2 maids would be Julia Evans and Susan Lepole. This seemed to frighten the princess's maid a little, because she asked very loudly why she had chosen these particular girls. The princess couldn't understand why her assistant had such a strange reaction, She asked her about it and said that they came from very influential houses. She told the astonished Belle that Julia was known for being precious, the only daughter of the Evans family. The girl replied that she was not sure she would be good at being a maid. She then asked her mistress what she was going to do about the difficult character of another applicant for the position of maid. The princess laughed and said that if she was not mistaken, this girl was called a poisonous snake with a blade in its mouth. She explained that despite her bad character, she absolutely needed Susan. La Paul. She knew very well from a novel she had once read that the strongest friendship in the world had been built between Susan and Olivia. Bella resigned herself to her mistress's choice and said that since she needed her so much, so be it. The princess laughed again and jokingly told the girl that she was very glad that she trusted her. After this, she told her that she had a message for her and asked if she could take her letter. When she took the envelope from the princess's hands, she asked her again if this was Olivia's letter again. The princess said it was for someone else. She told her that the letter was addressed to a man she missed very much. This man had been close to her since childhood. She felt in her arms as if she were next to her own mother. The letter was addressed to a woman who had once been banished from the palace by order of the emperor, and whom he had now permitted to return. The princess said the letter was written for her dear nanny, Clorenz, Elevin. It was with these words that she began her letter, writing, "My dear nanny." At first she asked in her letter whether everything was still well with the nanny. Then she wrote that time, unfortunately, is inexorable, and about 10 years have passed since their separation. She told the nanny that every year around this time, she remembered the childhood she spent with her. It was a time when they would make a mess in the kitchen and decorate the cake they had baked. And sometimes, while preparing something delicious, the little princess would burn it or start a fire in the kitchen. It also happened very often that the girl would hopelessly ruin beautiful dresses. The nanny never scolded her, but only asked if she was very scared and said what a blessing it was that she wasn't hurt. In such cases, the woman always told the girl that her late mother, the Empress, was definitely protecting her. The princess wrote to her nanny that she had never shackled her, but only surrounded her with her love, which is why lately she has been remembering the past and preparing sweets. She also wrote to the nanny that everyone praised her baking, and it was all thanks to her lessons. Sitting at the table near the window, the princess wrote to Madame Elivin that her birthday was coming soon and she would be an adult. Also, her exile was lifted, but that did not mean she had to return to the palace. Satisfied with her work, the princess wrote that she would continue to miss her nanny in any case, but would always respect her choice. At the end of her message, she said that she would be very glad to have a nanny come, and would be even happier if they could at least sometimes share the pleasure of making sweets together. She thought that she missed her adopted mother very much. When the princess remembered the lines from her letter, she almost burst into tears. She thought that she really wanted to see this woman. The princess put her letter in the envelope and remembered that it had been a long time since she had missed anyone. She wanted to hope that the nanny would feel her sincerity. When she told the maid that the letter was finished and there was one last thing left for today, the girl asked where she should be taken. Caught in a thought about what she should tell the maid. She was planning to do something important, and a moment later she told her that they would go to a place that would become an extremely important guide in future affairs. In order to go to this place, the girls were forced to leave the imperial palace. When they found themselves in this mysterious place, the maid could not believe that this was what was meant by the important guide. She asked the princess if she had suspected the contents of the books and the imperial travel guide in the imperial library. The princess replied that it was self-evident. She said that every hour was worth its weight in gold now. Meetings with aristocrats would not be enough to increase their authority, but the princess said that there was no need to hurry. Belle tried to object to her again, saying that there were many other important things they should be doing, but the princess was unwavering. She said that, according to the girl, now is the period of appointment of expensive ladies-in-waiting. That is why every step of the princess greatly worries the high society. Everyone around was now discussing why the princess had visited the imperial library. Is this some kind of trick involving the ladies-in-waiting? The princess said that in the meantime, she was simply looking through books about travels around their empire, in particular about holiday destinations in their country. She decided that in that case, everyone would think that everything was clear with her, and that they were only worrying in vain. All she needed to do was to simply relax their too close attention to her peculiarities. The princess said that the more those around her belittle her weight, the easier it becomes for her to act. Her maid immediately agreed with her, saying that it was true, and again called her mistress incredible. The princess thought it was a pretty good cover. She told the girl that it was the easiest way to lull others into a false sense of security. Her main goal, for which she came here, was to find a place where she would live after she got out of the palace. The princess was sure that while the emperor was alive, she needed to raise the issue of assigning some land to her by inheritance. She ran her finger over the map and thought that most of the lands she had originally set her sights on were in the east of the empire. But unfortunately for the girl, that's where the Evans live, so it couldn't suit her. In the west, too, difficulties could arise, because in this way she could bring inconvenience to Raffaello. The girl was thinking about where to find a place far from the capital, free from influential aristocrats. The princess was sure that if she was going to find the man of her dreams and marry him, it had to be a place that would be easy for her to manage. She envisioned it as a safe and clean estate with a small garden where she could grow several types of herbs and vegetables. It should be a cozy and quiet place, with the sea or lake a little further away. She dreamed about her cozy nest for so long that she seemed to have lost track of time. These dreams warmed her soul and heart. The princess wanted to escape from the capital as quickly as possible, and first she needed to get out of this palace, which looked more like her prison. She pressed the collection of maps of their empire to her chest and decided that she would definitely find a place in it where she could spend her future happy life. She was so deep in her thoughts that she didn't even notice how she became an object of observation for other visitors to this place. Some young men looked into the door of the room where the princess was and said that this could not be. They also said that she was so beautiful. Ka-ine informed the surprised maid that this had been part of her plan too, and had worked out all too well. She then suggested that they take a couple of books with them and return to the palace. On the way, the girls slowly moved through the garden and admired its beauty. They were talking sweetly to each other about something. The princess told her maid that the weather was very fine today. The maid agreed with her, saying that the sky was surprisingly clear and calm. Kana said that it would be very good if the imperial palace were always as peaceful as it is now. She thought that if her nanny came back, she would be able to spend time with her like before. The princess decided that in that case, she would not mind staying longer in the palace either. At some point, the girl suddenly became curious whether there had ever been such a peaceful time in her life before. Someone's voice made the princess shudder nervously. Someone addressed her, calling her Highness. And then it seemed to her as if someone whispered it to her. A man approached her and said that he had not seen her for so many years and so many winters. And although he asked the princess if everything was all right with her, her face reflected the horror that was raging in her soul. No matter how hard you try, you can't escape your fate. Alas. She looked at the man approaching her with fear, and although she understood that he could not threaten her in any way, she could not do anything about her fear. When the young man found himself very close to her, he said that he thought he would go mad from longing for her highness. It was her ex-husband who abused and killed her, Henberton Killian. It was because of him that she was forced to wear long clothes without a single naked place to hide the traces of violence. Because of him, she sent her half-brother many letters in which she begged the prince who had abandoned her for salvation. Memories of hiding in her dark castle, as if playing hide-and-seek to avoid this man's eyes, appeared in the princess's mind. Then, when she had no one to rely on, as a last hope she asked Raffaello for help, but her husband took the letter away and called her stupid. That time he asked his wife, who was sitting at his feet, why she still couldn't forget this man. Towering over the princess, he told her that no one would ever come to save her. He began to threaten her because in her situation she dared to try to escape from her husband. She remembered that in the presence of this cruel man she did not even dare to raise her eyes to him or say anything in her defense. And in the end, the girl fell into the hands of this madman and met her death at his hands. The princess tried to calm down and began to tell herself that everything was fine. Nothing had happened yet, and the current Killian could neither lock her up nor hurt her with a blade. She tried to act as calm as possible, as if nothing was happening. As if remembering, she named her interlocutor and said that they had danced at a ball before. She knew she could handle her task perfectly well. After all, hiding her feelings was a piece of cake for her. The young man blossomed into a wide smile before her. He said that everything was true, and he was very glad that she had not forgotten him. And as expected, it seemed that their connection was created by fate. The princess thought that there was no telling what else he would have done if she had ignored him, pretending not to remember. She had told him not to overdo it, and she had remembered his name only out of etiquette. When he heard her answer, the girl noted to herself that the man's face again began to resemble the one she remembered from his previous life. His eyes flashed with a predatory gleam. He asked if it was just etiquette, and allowed himself to remind her that she had danced with him twice then. He came closer to her and began to tell her how magical that blue dress looked on her. Influenced by what he saw, he even found a tailor and ordered the same one from him, so that it would continue to sparkle before the man's eyes. It seemed to her that these were the words of a real maniac, because he continued and said that he already had the same lace gloves, the fabric of which he felt on his hand. He extended his ugly hand towards the girl and said how charming her embarrassment looked as she accepted the offer. He looked her straight in the face and confidently told the princess that he was also so special to her. The girl was frightened by the words of the man standing in front of her. She was even more frightened when he tried to hug her. The moment Kay Ilian approached her at close range, real horror appeared in the girl's eyes. She became scared, and she decided that she really needed to run. He stretched out his hand to her, but thanks to someone's intervention, he was unable to touch her. Someone's strong hand grabbed her ex-husband by the wrist. A man appeared out of nowhere and put his arm around her, asking if she was okay. It was the Duke, who seemed to have arrived at a very opportune time for the princess. She could not believe her salvation and looked gratefully into the young man's face. At that moment, the girl's heart was beating wildly from the horror she had endured. For some reason, the heart in the young Duke's chest began to beat just as fast. He let her go and began to watch the princess. She was shaking violently. The Duke looked closely at the girl and could not understand why the princess was shaking so much. He could not believe that the reason for this was some man pestering her. After this, Raphael turned to Kilian, who was still present, and asked him where he had lost his manners. At the same time, he continued to hold the princess in his arms to calm her and stop the trembling in her body. The princess's ex-husband, it would seem, was not at all upset by what had happened, but only laughed and said that there had been some misunderstanding, since he only sincerely wanted to accompany the princess. He continued and said that Her Highness had wavered, and he had only supported her, while his little rat eyes continued to dart about, betraying the man's lie. He asked the princess, who was looking at him angrily, if everything was not as he had said. She looked at the impudent man standing in front of them and thought that if she got rid of him now, he would definitely come back with even greater persistence. And she decided that it would be better to please him now, and the princess confirmed that this man was right. She felt sick because she was just a little dizzy. Kilian bowed to them and said that he was very happy to help Her Highness. He glanced at her from under his brows and added that he was sorry he hadn't been able to accompany her, but perhaps they could come to an agreement next time. Supported by the Duke, the girl heard from this man she hated that they would see each other again. She thanked the Duke who held her and said that she was always causing him some kind of trouble. The princess suddenly discovered that the Duke was still holding her in his arms. She freed herself from them and asked his forgiveness and asked what brought the Duke to this place. It seemed that the young man could not immediately find a suitable answer, because he fell silent for a moment, as if he was searching his head for a suitable answer. He then told the princess that he just had business at the Imperial Academy, which was located next to the library. It was while he was there that he heard that the princess was in the library, so he came here, thinking that maybe they could see her. Again, with a reproachful voice, he informed the girl that she had already refused his requests for an audience more than 10 times. The young man told the princess that during this time a lot of unpleasant things had happened in the palace. Of course, he meant the burn, the nut poisoning, and the fact that the princess was left without maids of honor. The girl thought that she wanted to meet him briefly as soon as the rumor of the marriage arrangement had spread, but events followed one another. She told him that, of course, many interesting things had happened to her recently, and if he had any questions, she was ready to answer them. The Duke replied that he had a whole mountain of questions, but perhaps they could wait for now. The man said he didn't think those questions should be asked today. The princess was stunned by the way he said it, because he said that her rest was much more important than his curiosity. The Duke could not forget the little hands, shaking so much that his heart bled at the sight of them. The princess's face was so pale that it seemed as if she was terrified. The Duke decided that he wanted to be at least a small consolation for the frightened princess. That is why he extended his hand to her to offer something. He looked into the shocked princess's face and told her that she should invite him next time. She did not believe his words and asked if he was really asking her to invite the Duke herself to visit. He told her that everything was exactly like that. As soon as she had the opportunity and could rest, he would eagerly await her invitation. The girl was surprised by his words when he said that she had refused him many times before. And is that still not enough? The princess waited impatiently for what he would say next. She was curious how he would get out of this situation, but the Duke decided not to continue their conversation any longer, bowed and reminded her once again that he would wait for her invitation. The girl was a little surprised by how their conversation ended. She had hoped to discuss something with the Duke, but it seemed that it was not meant to be. Suddenly, remembering something, he said that the recipe for tea she gave him, no matter how he tried to repeat it, did not produce the same taste. He asked if he could ask her to brew this tea next time. The princess smiled and said that she would make as much tea as he wanted. She smiled mysteriously and slyly at the young man and assured him that she would prepare for this tea party in the best possible way. Late in the evening, Raphael was in his family home and could not begin his usual activities because he was haunted by one annoying thought. He looked at his palms and couldn't understand how this had happened to him lately. The man was confused as to why something had changed with his illness. The touch, in his opinion, was not unpleasant. He wondered if something like this had ever happened to him before, and he came to the conclusion that this was the first time he had felt this way. He felt it, and that in itself was confusing. But that wasn't all. The princess was also confusing him. He looked at his palm again, squeezed his fingers a couple of times, and wondered if everything had really returned to normal. To make sure that everything was all right with him, the Duke decided to check, and for this purpose, he called one of his court nobles named Baston. The young man immediately appeared at the call of his master and asked if he needed to bring him anything. To the surprise of the newcomer, the young Duke asked him to take his hand and nothing more. It seemed that any other request of the Duke would have surprised his servant less. He was simply dumbfounded by his request. He decided that something was wrong with his master. The young man looked around the office, where there were only the two of them. He thought that the young master's actions lately were quite unexpected, and the request belonged to just such actions. To the young man, this seemed like a wild proposition. He could not believe that the Duke wanted to touch him with his hand, and because of this, his heart only began to beat faster. But there was nothing to be done, and he was forced to do it. When he touched the Duke's hand, the Duke said that it was even more disgusting and ordered him to remove his hand. The Duke recoiled so sharply that he inadvertently even hit the young man, and he began to cry from the pain he received as a result of the blow and from the insult that the Duke had raised his hand to him. Raphael wondered what that meant. He remembered the princess acting as if she was uncomfortable with being touched, as if she had the same symptoms. Hearing the young man's whining, another of the court nobles joined in. It was the Duke's adjutant, and the two of them began to watch the young gentleman. The Duke was still busy with his thoughts. He thought that it was all very strange. He decided that he had made a slight mistake, and it was not about the touching itself, because the princess accepted the accompaniment of her half-brother normally. Then he remembered that, although it was by chance, she had pressed herself against him for a long time, and it seemed to her that it was hateful. But it was unclear why, after this, she suddenly changed her mind so abruptly and pushed away the man who saved her. Eventually, the Duke came to the conclusion that the princess was behaving as if she was doing it out of concern for him. He wondered if she knew anything about his illness, but then he decided that this could not be, because no one could know about it. Even the knights with whom he had been together since childhood knew nothing about the Duke's illness. At this time, his charges began to whisper among themselves about something. They could not understand what was happening to him, and thought that the reason for this was the princess whom their master was accompanying. They decided that perhaps it was love. The Duke didn't even notice anyone around him or hear what his nobles were saying. He simply withdrew into himself for a while, lost in his thoughts. The young men said that their master's face did not look like that of a lover, and that something more serious seemed to be bothering him. They came to the conclusion that he had some serious problem. After some time, their master woke up from his reverie and called out to one of the young men. He called his adjutant to him. When his adjutant approached the Duke, he began, at his master's request, to tell him about the man he had met that day. He said that Killian was the eldest son of his marquisate, and that he had recently broken off his engagement to his fiancée. The Duke suddenly became curious as to why the Marquis had decided to break off his long-planned engagement so suddenly. The young man thought for a moment and began scratching the back of his head. He said that it had happened about 2 months ago, if he was not mistaken. Jeremy thought for a moment and began to explain that, although the Marquis's family were vassals of their family, he did not like this house at all. He was immediately supported by another courtier who was nearby. He called the Marquises bastards and said that the Viscount himself was a libertine who had more than 5 mistresses alone, and his son was no better than his father. The Duke thought it all looked very strange. He wondered if there was another reason why the princess could be so afraid of the man she met in the garden. That is why he decided to find out more about the heir of the vassal family, and told his adjutant that he should do this immediately. The young man again remembered the princess's fright during today's incident. Her face was pale and her eyes were full of fear. Her hands were shaking slightly from terror. He could not forget the girl's fright and how suddenly she calmed down after she saw the Duke. He would very much like to get to the bottom of the princess's fear. It seemed to him that in her position, she should not be afraid of anyone, since she was under the protection of the emperor. The Duke wondered why this scene couldn't get out of his head. He felt like he was missing something important that needed to be sorted out. Night had fallen over the imperial palace. The starry sky covered its spires, and the palace visitors were preparing for bed. The princess was doing just that. She was washing her hands and thinking that she was not going to get involved with Kay Ilian in any way this time, but she couldn't figure out how to do it. As she began to wash herself, she wondered whether she should get rid of this man, but decided that his destruction would only benefit the prince and his rival. She knew that the family of the man she hated so much were not only vassals of the Duke, but they also traded in war horses, which made their family very influential. She decided that if she wanted to collaborate with Raphael, then it would be completely inappropriate to touch the Killian family. She was sure that this did not need to be done yet, so that he would not start to hate her. She stopped washing for a second and thought that for some reason when she saw the Duke, she felt very calm in her soul. For the first time, she felt so protected. The girl thought that it could have been simple peace from joy and gratitude for his cooperation and for saving her from her ex-husband. The princess thought that she did not want to annoy the Duke at all, but that was how things turned out. She began to wipe her face and decided that she would only turn to him in case of emergency. Kaina thought that all she wanted was to get out of the imperial palace and live in a quiet village until she died, but there was still a lot to do to achieve that. The princess turned around abruptly and, addressing someone, said that maybe he would stop hiding and come out. There was a rustling sound behind the curtain of her window, as if someone was hiding or concealing themselves there. When the one hiding came out into the light, the princess thought that she needed to get away from him as far away as possible. The prince came out and began to look at his half-sister, who could not understand how he had ended up there. He had been through many trials of late: exile to his chambers, punishment for staying there, and on top of that, the emperor's disfavor. What probably hit him even harder was that he lost the levers of his power. There was a change in the composition of the maids and even the ladies-in-waiting. When alone, the prince often thought that everything was happening sequentially and without his participation. It seemed to him that his place in the imperial palace was becoming smaller and smaller. The more he thought about all this, the more he became convinced that it was not his place that was becoming smaller, but everything he owned was gradually passing to his half-sister. It was the princess who gave the right to manage the ladies-in-waiting to the prince, saying that it was too much for her. But at the same time, she herself continued to pull the strings, manipulating everything that happened in the palace. The young man decided that the princess was not capable of such a thing, and he just had to be patient. He was determined to endure it, and one reason why he had to do it was the princess. He knew the girl was his thing. He remembered that the feeling of fullness, like sunlight, was definitely real. Lately, the prince felt like he and his sister had become closer. It was enough for her to just be near him all the time, like now. He didn't demand anything else from her. He noticed the princess's scent emanating from his advisor during one of his visits, and remarked that it was very unpleasant for him. The prince was sure that his power was slipping from his hands like sand, and he did not yet know what he should do. He learned that the girl had met the Duke in the library. He remembered how she had said that she would marry whomever her brother chose. Had she really planned to lull him into a false sense of security, only to stab him in the back? The prince decided that if his sister married this man, she would be able to get away from him. Although, on the other hand, entering into an alliance with the Duke would not be a bad decision. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that stealing anything from him was a bad decision for anyone who did it. He asked his sister if she was planning to escape from the imperial capital. The princess was at first dumbfounded by this question. She could not understand how he knew about this, because she did not share her thoughts and dreams with anyone. The girl came closer to him and said that such a thing was simply impossible. She continued and added that she did not know what he had heard since he was behaving in such a way. The prince asked her if she really needed marriage so much, and if that was not why she had met with the Duke today. Ka-ina replied that it was just a simple coincidence. When she was returning from the library, she accidentally met the Duke, who was visiting the Imperial Academy. It seemed that the young man did not believe her words at all, because he pulled the girl towards him a little and shouted that he did not believe in such coincidences. He pulled his sister close to him and said that she could not have told him anything else, because everything had probably been planned by them, like the expulsion of all his people from the palace. The princess could not understand what had so upset and enraged the young man. She did not understand what could have caused such a storm of emotions in him. The girl remembered her past life, as well as the number of letters she wrote to the prince, begging for salvation, in response to which he only turned his back on her. She thought that all this was just a thing of the past, and therefore everything in this life should be fine now. The prince told her that he did not like it when his authority was challenged. He remembered when they were little children, so wounded and so powerless. Then he extended his hand to his sister and told her that he would not leave behind any dangerous shoots. It seemed that he was mentally reciting a prayer that included the words, "But what if we turn out to be not villains who have asked for heavenly punishment?" He reached out to his sister's neck and began to press on it, continuing to repeat that they were just brother and sister with slightly difficult temperaments. As tears appeared in the princess's eyes, he wondered if things should go back to normal in that case. With both hands, the young man began to squeeze his sister's neck and told his sister that if he wanted, her life would end, because he was her emperor. The princess could no longer breathe, but chuckled slightly, trying to object to something. She thought that they could still be saved and told the prince that if he wanted to, he could kill her. The young man's hand trembled and he looked at his sister with fear in his eyes. He could not understand why she had so easily agreed to die. Without removing his hands from her neck, the girl said that she knew that she could die at any moment, if only he wanted. But she had been ready for this for a long time. These words of hers struck the prince even more. He was ready for her to beg him not to kill her, but now he completely stopped understanding the person standing before him. The prince pushed his sister away from him as hard as he could and asked her if she had gone mad. He thought she was out of her mind. He looked at her and asked why she would so easily agree to die at his hand, and why she didn't want to live at all. First, Ka-ina cleared her throat and tried to catch her breath, and then told the prince that it seemed he was now ready to engage in a dialogue with her. Her neck was red and very painful. The girl touched it and said only one word, asking him, "Betrayal?" She began to shift nervously from foot to foot and told her brother that he had lost the right to manage the ladies-in-waiting, but that this was not as critical as he thought. She added that there was a gap in his power, so he needed to fill it with something new before it got bigger. The princess explained to the young man that in reality the prince had no benefit from power over the ladies-in-waiting. They were just throwing dust in his eyes, not wanting to allow him to have real power. The young man stood before her, his head and hands hanging down. He looked sad. The princess asked him that he probably understood all this himself. He didn't answer her question because she had guessed his thoughts correctly. He just nervously clenched and unclenched his fists. After thinking for a moment, the prince asked his sister whether what she was offering him was his chance, and whether she advised him to seize it. Ka-ina confirmed his words and said that this was his chance, but there was no urgent need for it. The girl extended her hand towards her half-brother and reminded him that she had told him that she would make him emperor, and added that she was not going to go back on her words. She approached the young man again and said that if he wanted new power, then she would definitely help him with it. Rezef didn't understand what she was talking about. His eyes were filled with confusion, but the hand touching his cheek had a calming effect on him, and the princess told him that as soon as the time of his exile approached his father, he should immediately go to his father, the emperor, and seek his forgiveness. The girl explained that the emperor would give new power to his son, but he would still have to grovel before the emperor. She said that the prince needed to be patient, and as soon as he noticed that his father's attitude towards him began to improve, he needed to ask him for something. And after that, she came close to the young man and whispered only 2 words in his ear. Katrin Rinberg. It was this woman, because of whom Henrik, who looked more like a rough robber than an aristocrat, eventually received the right to inherit the throne from the incomparable emperor. It was a woman who had once been the current emperor's lover in the past. The princess told her brother that he should bring this person as an adopted daughter to the county of Hamel, the family of the young princess on her mother's side, since it was necessary to protect this woman from all factions. Many years ago, when the emperor was still full of strength, something special happened. It was several decades ago, when the emperor was not yet bedridden, that he went on his last trip to the hunting grounds and met Catherine there. The girl immediately charmed him, and he decided that they should continue their relationship. The emperor was blinded by her beauty and fell in love with her at first sight. However, everything turned out to be not so simple. The girl's father, the head of her family, fell into the trap of the Archduke and died allegedly due to an accident. The girl herself found herself in the hands of the Archduke, who had swallowed her mouth and was in a rather precarious position. She could be reduced to a commoner at any moment. The emperor always remembered his beloved, but unfortunately for him, he could do nothing to help her in her difficult situation. The aging emperor's main desire was to protect his beloved before he died, but he did not yet know how to do this. The prince could not believe that he was being offered to help this woman and also bring the princess to the county as an adopted daughter. He did not believe that the family of the late empress would accept the young mistress of the emperor. That is why the young man asked his sister, standing opposite him, how people from her family could do this. It seems that the princess was prepared for her brother's question, because she immediately assured him that they would agree. She was sure that accepting this woman was much better for them than disturbing the mental balance of principals. She explained that they could lose the black market as a source of income, and with her help, they could easily limit the emperor's power in another way. But this did not seem to convince the prince, because he shouted that this woman had a son from the emperor's father. He told the princess that he too might be nominated by the pretenders to the throne and asked if she realized how foolish it would be to contribute to this. The princess declared that Catherine was not one of those people who strived for power. The goal of her life was only her well-being together with her son. Endless intrigues, envy, struggle for authority. She was completely fed up with all of this. Kana looked at her brother's face and smiled. She said that the emperor's former mistress did not want her son to become the future emperor. She said that this boy was barely 13 years old. Not only is he too young, his family is in as pitiful a state as it can possibly be. He is not a rival, nor is he a threat to the prince. After this, the princess said that the archduke also did not want the number of contenders for the throne to increase, so he would also try to prevent this. It seemed that her words had the desired effect. After them, the prince fell silent for a long time and thought. He wondered whether he should trust his sister after it seemed to him that she had completely limited his power, and it was because of her that he found himself imprisoned in his palace. The prince remained silent, so his sister decided to tell him something else. She came closer to him and said that they both knew very well that they had to fight for him to eventually gain power. The princess called him the most precious and beloved child of the emperor's father, and lightly stroked his cheek. She stroked her brother's cheek and said that it wasn't about him. Then she repeated that it certainly didn't concern her either. She was not her father's favorite child. The princess looked into the eyes of the young man standing in front of her and said that this was Katherine's son. The girl said that this is truly boundless love. Their father even gave the right to inherit the throne to the bastard archduke, just to protect this child. The princess told her brother that all power still remained in their hands, and if he agreed with her, then this must be taken advantage of. She smiled slyly at him and added that they simply had to use all the cards they had in their hands. The princess placed her hand on her chest and told the prince that this was their way of survival in this dangerous world. By building a protective wall around the emperor's mistress, the prince will be able to win the recognition of his father, the emperor, and at the same time get his hands on a simply delightful hostage. Rezef thought that all this he heard was simply unbelievable. He could not believe that his sister was so smart and was able to predict and plan events so well. The prince could not believe that his sister had actually thought of all this, just adjusting to circumstances. It all seemed impossible to him, because she did not have a single decent informant. He noted that he had been wrong to think the princess was stupid. Now he was sure that she had terrifying cunning and insight. In addition, she calculated all the moves and figures on the board. The young man thought that she would never be able to pull off something like that, because not just any person could do it. It was something that only a natural-born intriguer could do. And while the prince was thinking about how his sister had managed to plan all this, she quickly grabbed his wrist. It was so unexpected that the young man even got scared and shuddered. He was deep in his thoughts and not ready for any action. It seemed that his sister had now become the ordinary princess he had grown accustomed to seeing over the years. She took his hand, smiled at him, and asked if they had finally made peace. She still continued to hold his hand with hers and asked him if he was still angry with his sister and if he was ready to do great things with her. She continued to coax him. He thought that this was really the girl he knew. His easygoing and affectionate sister. His quiet haven. He had not yet decided to answer her. He was still resentful for everything that had happened earlier. Perhaps the misunderstanding had been cleared up, but the sediment remained in the young man's soul. As he held her hand, the prince thought about how all his anger had managed to disappear so instantly. The young man had no idea where his sister suddenly got such insight from. It frightened him very much, and he was not ready to believe in the girl's good intentions. It seemed to the young man that these traits, which he could now discern in the princess, could be dangerous for him in the future, and he should be very careful with her. The young girl stepped out of the carriage and raised her head up to see the majestic sight that opened before her eyes. It was precisely the imperial palace she had seen many times in her dreams, in which she was now to live. With timid and unhurried steps, this provincial woman who had just arrived in the capital began to move towards the place where the biggest changes in her short life awaited her. The young lady thought that she could refuse everything else, but it was impossible for her to go against the imperial order. She really did receive His Majesty's decree with the next letter, and she decided to move to this palace as soon as possible to check out the situation. So she came here early. The palace turned out to be so huge that she had never even imagined it. Someone addressed Olivia by name and said that he had been waiting for her. The girl who called her introduced herself and said that she was a maid of honor at the princess's palace, and her name was Belle. Olivia remembered hearing that all the maids had been kicked out of the palace recently. So this maid must be high class since she hadn't been touched in the middle of that incident. The girl who arrived bowed to her interlocutor and said that she was very pleased to meet her and asked her to take care of herself. The lady-in-waiting who met her immediately gave her a short tour of the princess's chambers. She was her person and told her that the second floor was intended for meetings of the ladies-in-waiting, and added that, including them, there were only 4 ladies-in-waiting. She said that their position was very privileged, but also responsible. It was this girl who was responsible for the ladies-in-waiting. While the girls were moving through the corridors of the palace, Belle told the new maid of honor that she would be entrusted with all matters concerning the receptions, and that she would be responsible for the schedule, dress code, conditions, etc. Olivia listened attentively to her companion and could not understand why such a good place was given to her. A girl from a low family. Perhaps she even had the highest position after that of her interlocutor. After some time, the maid of honor stopped and told her that they had already arrived, and Her Highness was waiting for the girl inside. When she asked if there was anything she should know in advance, Belle smiled and told her that she already knew everything perfectly well. After the door creaked open slightly, Olivia felt a barely perceptible, calming, refined aroma spreading from the princess's room. She went inside and began to look around. The room looked more like some famous painting painted by sunbeams. The young princess's guest was amazed by what she saw. Everything was so dazzlingly beautiful that it seemed to her as if she were in a fairy tale or some very beautiful dream, and the reality of which was the hardest to believe. The owner of this room was busy reading a book. She looked up for a second and asked the girl if she had arrived. The lady-in-waiting who had received her position was extremely happy to be in this fabulous place where, it seemed, a wonderful future awaited her. And it was this delightful beauty who had invited her here. The girl who came looked very nervous. She still did not know how to behave with her new mistress, and so she began to nervously squeeze the hem of her dress with both hands. Olivia began to calm herself down mentally. She ordered herself to be as calm as possible and to behave as politely as possible. Then the girl curtsied slightly to the princess and introduced herself. Said that Olivia greeted her. Grace. Kana decided to put her book aside and talk to her guest. She told her that for some reason she had arrived a day earlier than they had agreed. The new maid of honor seemed a little frightened, but confirmed that this was indeed the case, and she decided to move into the palace as soon as possible due to the princess's lack of an assistant maid. The princess, her heels clicking on the floor, moved closer to the girl and told her that she had answered quite wittily and that she liked it. She smiled at the girl as kindly as she could and said that choosing Olivia as her lady-in-waiting had been a truly wise decision, and she was very glad that she had already arrived at the palace. Olivia couldn't believe her ears and eyes. She was simply stunned by the reception the princess gave her. After all, before she was completely different and didn't like her at all. The newly arrived girl bowed before the princess and thanked her for choosing her, and also promised that she would serve her very diligently so that she would never regret it. The princess chuckled with satisfaction when she heard the girl's words. She thought that she had made no mistake when she decided to invite her as her maid of honor. The girl began to think about what she had previously known about Olivia from a novel she had once read in a completely different life. Perhaps she knew quite a lot about her. The Olivia standing before her had glossy, wheat-colored hair and intelligent, twinkling green eyes set in a pleasant, pretty face. She had a characteristic, pear-shaped figure. She was distinguished by her good manners and polite speech. She was the best fit for the role that her new mistress had chosen for her. The princess believed that she had chosen a sensible, wise girl with a discerning eye who could be of great use to her in the future. She stared at the real maid in front of her and decided that despite the harsh conditions of her previous life, she looked calm and intelligent. She was the true heroine of this world. Looking at her, the princess thought that such a person could never be a wrong choice on her part. She repeated the words of the girl once again, who said that she would never regret her choice. The princess decided that it was not worth keeping her guest in suspense for long after the journey and asked her not to worry about anything. promising that everything would be fine. And while the maid of honor stood bowing deeply before her, the princess told her that she had decided to do nothing more that she would ever regret. Ka-ina added that everything she said, of course, also applied to the girl standing in front of her. She was not going to regret choosing her. She had no more room for any stupid regrets. The princess did not stop talking and tried to tell her guest as much as possible. She said that she must have been very scared when she was invited to work in the princess's palace. After this, the hospitable hostess invited her guest to the table, offering her tea, and told her that she would be glad if she forgot about the time when she had annoyed her. It seems that the poor but happy Olivia has already forgotten the past insults inflicted on her by the princess. She said that the princess had not bothered her in any way, and it had not even touched her. And although she told the princess that it was a great honor for her to be here, she definitely noticed that the princess looked completely different from how she remembered her once, with all sorts of intrigues, only humiliating and punishing her. The princess told the maid of honor that, thank God, if she really thought so, she had time to think about the girl's dignified movements and authoritative free speech. After this, Kana looked closely at her interlocutor and, as if by accident, asked her how old she was. Noticing that she was about 20, she asked if she had already had her coming-of-age ceremony. The girls sat at the table and enjoyed their tea. The princess said that she did not remember hearing about her guest's ceremony. She added that she had been too indifferent before. Olivia replied that, of course, the princess could not have heard anything about her ceremony. She decided to tell the princess everything, as if it were true, and told her that their family situation was not the best. And there were many younger sisters and brothers. That was why there was no coming-of-age ceremony. Then something happened that the girl who had come to the capital had not expected at all. As if nothing had happened, the princess told her that everything had gone very well, and that her ceremony could be held together with the princess's ceremony. The girl couldn't help but choke on the tea she had just drunk, taken aback by Kana's words. She couldn't even imagine that she could receive such an offer. The girl wiped her mouth and face with a napkin and asked, "Is this possible? And is this perhaps too much?" But it seemed the princess had changed dramatically since she last saw her, because she said that she couldn't be called a princess if she couldn't take care of her man, at least that way. Since Olivia was a very modest girl, she again tried to refuse, telling the princess that it was a great honor for her, and she did not know how she could thank her for it later. Placing her cup of tea on the table, the princess asked her not to worry about anything, as she had already decided that their ceremonies would take place on the same day and in the same place. Kana told Olivia that the honor of her man was her honor, and since she was now with the princess, it was her mistress's duty to make sure that she did not need anything. The girl smiled, seeing the confusion and sincere emotions on the face of her maid of honor. She was very pleased to do at least something for her that could please her. Then the princess again looked attentively and sincerely into the face of her new maid of honor, and asked her to consider this a defense of the master's good name and not to refuse her gift. Looking at this amazed girl, Ka-ina thought that the natural, like breathing grandeur and refined manners of controlling the pawns in her hands were not coercion, but rather this was the manifestation of true strength. The girl remained just as nervous. She began to hold her other hand with her right hand so as not to reveal its nervous trembling, and thanked the princess for her kindness. She continued to hold her hand, which was shaking even more, and decided that, whatever the case, Princess Kana was her new mistress, and a person who truly behaved as befits a member of the imperial family. The conversation between the two girls was suddenly interrupted by a knock at the entrance door to the princess's room. The one who knocked turned out to be another of her maids of honor named Belle A. She informed the princess that Sir Kidri, whom she had invited, had arrived. This made the princess a little nervous. She turned to her maid and told her that the Duke had arrived earlier than she thought. The princess guest looked just as amazed, because the man who had come was her potential fiancé and could become her husband in the future. Kana thought about what she should do now. The Duke's appearance in this place now could ruin all her plans, and she did not want that. She looked at her new lady-in-waiting and thought that Olivia had just arrived at the princess's palace, and it would probably be difficult to arrange a one-on-one meeting with the Duke, just like that, without any preparation. The princess decided to get up from her seat and leaned on the table. She decided that this should be arranged for next time. She should have many more opportunities to pit the girl against the Duke. She asked the maid of honor to tell her guest that she would soon be free and come to him. The meeting was to take place in the same place where the previous meeting of the young people had taken place, in a glass room where refreshments were already waiting for them. By the time the Duke arrived, the maids had already prepared everything, and a generous feast was set on the table for the young man. Forced to wait for his hospitable hostess, the Duke sat down in a chair and began to wait for her. He waited for the princess to appear here, and in order not to waste time, decided to drink tea again. But, to his regret, it was not the same tea that the girl treated him to last time. In the end, he waited for her. The door leading to this room creaked, and the mistress of the palace entered it. It seemed to him that the princess was in a great hurry to meet him. She even lifted her dress a little to move faster. As soon as Kana appeared in the room, she immediately noticed to the Duke that he had arrived quite early and asked him if she had kept her waiting too long. As usual, her guest did not remove his gloves because of the illness that was troubling him. He leaned his hand lightly on the table as he rose from his chair and said that the wait had not been long. The young man bowed to the princess and greeted her, saying that he was very glad to see her again. He thanked her for sending him the invitation and reminded her that at their last meeting a few days ago, she had said that she would answer all the questions the man was interested in. He would very much like to receive these answers as soon as possible. He was intrigued by the princess's silence and the fact that she had refused to meet him many times under any pretext, canceling his audience. That is why Raphael decided to tell her today that he wants to hear these answers from Her Highness in order to know what actions he should take next. The young Duke continued to hold the princess's hand in his. He decided to test his theory about whether she had any signs of mysophobia or whether she had simply been concerned about the Duke's well-being last time. The princess came a little closer to him and said that she would try to satisfy his curiosity because she believed that the Duke had accumulated many questions that required her immediate answer. Kana told her guest that they had plenty of time, so there was no need to hurry. She added that his journey must have been difficult, and that he might be tired. So they could have a cup of tea first. Kidri had finally come to see her today. She should make a little effort and personally brew tea for him. The young man could not hide his surprise and joy at the drink he loved so much. Last time, he was amazed by the taste of the tea prepared by the princess. The girl placed a cup filled with liquid on the table in front of him and said that it was that very tea with milk and that he should try it. The Duke was very happy to receive a cup of this desired drink. He pressed his glove to the cup and felt its warmth enveloping the young man's hand. Then he raised the cup with the drink to his mouth and felt the spicy aroma of the leaf tea, which touched the tip of his nose and pleasantly beckoned him to taste the tea. He began to drink the drink in small sips, and something seemed very strange to him. In his house, they definitely brewed tea with the same tea leaves and in the same way that the girl told him about. But something was still wrong with him. One evening, the young man asked the servants to make him some tea according to a recipe he had brought. They, of course, carried out their master's order. But when that tea was served to him, it tasted completely different and was significantly different from what the princess had offered him. He did not get any pleasure from drinking that cup of tea. The Duke wondered why today's tea was so delicious again, unlike the one he had prepared at home. He, of course, assumed that there might be some other secret to making a delicious drink. The princess looked at the man drinking tea opposite her, and it seemed to her that something was wrong with him. Or perhaps he did not like the tea. She asked him what was wrong and whether perhaps the tea did not taste so good today. Raphael thought that perhaps his tea was different because of Princess Kana. Perhaps in her presence, the tea seemed especially delicious to him. The young man told the mistress of the palace that this tea was surprisingly good. He could drink it endlessly. He also said that he followed the recipe she gave him completely, but the sensations and taste were completely different. After he said that the tea brewed by the princess really had a special taste, the girl laughed and thought that the Duke was speaking rather ambiguously. She said that this could not be. The recipe was the same and laughed again. Kana asked the Duke if he had really learned to flatter so sweetly somewhere, and then suggested moving on to the main point. The girl seemed a little nervous about the upcoming conversation because she began to nervously tap the time with the tip of her finger. She recalled that the Duke had said he had many questions and assumed they were about his marriage, then asked what he had found out about suitable candidates. Raffaello told her that he had done exactly as she had told him. He had collected information about the girls whose portraits she had given him. The young man told her that he had secretly found out everything about those girls whom she had advised not to take as wives, and the information about them was exactly confirmed. He learned from a secret source that the county of Ivan was on the verge of bankruptcy and would very soon fall into the hands of the Archduke. Rita of the Viscounty was also confirmed. Bruken, who was truly crazy, as all members of her family know. Still holding the cup of tea in his hand, the young man decided to warm his hand and ask the princess how she knew all this. This was exactly what he wanted to know at the very beginning of their conversation. Raffaello told the princess that he was also interested in something else. Little by little, other strange news began to reach his ears. He told the girl that he had learned how she had fainted due to an allergy, which had led to a real upheaval in the palace, and subsequently, all of the princess's maids of honor were driven out. He said that now both the management of the ladies in waiting and the temporary management of the finances were entrusted to the princess. That is why his wedding now interests the man not so much, and he became interested in something completely different. Having decided that the necessary introduction to the conversation had been made, the Duke decided to say directly what it was that interested him so much. He asked Her Highness what she really had in mind, and while she was still hesitating over her answer, the Duke asked the girl what kind of future she wanted and what her plans were for realizing it. Kana smiled slightly at her interlocutor and asked him for forgiveness, saying that the problem was that she couldn't tell him about it. It seemed that a spark had flared up in the eyes of the man sitting opposite her. He wanted to hear what was on this girl's mind, and she simply decided to refuse him. Outraged by the princess's answer, the young man almost jumped up from his seat and walked away, but then changed his mind, deciding that he would still be able to get answers to his questions. The princess noticed the determination of her interlocutor, and deciding to calm him down a little, she stood up from her chair, leaning her hand slightly on the table, and promised to tell him everything, but under certain conditions. Kana told the Duke that she would tell him if only he would get into the same boat that she was currently in. It seemed that the young man did not understand what was being said, because he continued to silently gaze at the princess standing in front of him and did not promise her anything. The princess suggested that perhaps this frightened the young man. If so, he might take the opportunity to refuse their agreement here and now. But she also warned the Duke that if he found out everything, he would never be able to escape. The princess began to walk nervously around the room, tapping her heels on the floor. She told him that in that case, whatever he wished, she would try to fulfill it. Kana walked up to the chair where Raphael was sitting and said that even if his wish was impossible to fulfill, she would put her name on the line. Kana Hill, but will do everything to help him as much as possible. She began to look closely into the young man's face, wondering if she had made a mistake in choosing him, and said that if he agreed with this, he should help her achieve what she wanted. As the man continued to hesitate with his answer, the princess suddenly thought that he was hesitating and would not give her a positive answer. This was not at all in her plans. To check that all was not lost and that she would be able to come to an agreement with him, the girl extended her hand in the direction of the young man sitting there and asked him what he would say about this. Without removing her hand, she carefully looked at the young man, whose thoughts were racing through his head at a furious speed, and asked if he would become her partner. She decided to push him a little with the decision and said that she was saying in advance that this would be an extremely profitable deal for him. The man looked at her and noted her confident actions, leaving no room for regret. It seemed to him that he was ready for any offer she made. It seemed to him that this girl was unusual. She was not like everyone else, as if she could see the distant future. Looking at her, he decided that it was as if the word princess itself was created for this girl standing in front of him, who in his eyes was a real ruler. The Duke realized that he couldn't just turn around and leave her alone. He had to help her, even without any conditions. The princess looked majestic, but at the same time he remembered that she was very small, fragile. She was a beauty who was about to break. He really wanted to remember his thoughts at that moment when he pressed this small body to himself. And when he thought about how he had wrapped his fingers around her waist and held her so that she would not fall, he remembered that it had brought him a feeling of joy and peace. And at the same time, there were no painful sensations that he had previously experienced in similar situations. The Duke looked through the glass ceiling into the sky, and it seemed to him that even it was ready for the young man to take his oath to his mistress. The young man thought that with his entire existence, he was simply obliged to protect and guard his princess, while he still had the strength to do so. He knelt down before the princess and began to swear his confidence to her, saying that he had never met such a gentle and at the same time strong girl. The Duke looked into Kana's eyes and said that he vowed to devote himself entirely to helping Her Highness Princess Kana. After that, he pressed his lips to the princess's hand and kissed it, thinking that not only was he obliged, but he also really wanted to protect this girl. And again, Raphael noted for himself that he was not bothered by the symptoms of the disease at all when he touched the princess with his hand. It seemed that at the moment when he did this, misophonia disappeared somewhere, and he became an ordinary, healthy person. Raphael did not let go of the hand of the princess standing in front of him, although he stopped kissing it, and then repeated again that he swears to devote himself entirely to helping Her Highness the princess. She couldn't understand what had happened to the Duke lately. She knew that he suffered from attacks of mysophobia that haunted him, but it seemed that lately some changes had happened to him too. When the man had finished his vow, the princess leaned toward him without pulling her hand away from his. She said that she entrusted herself to him and called the Duke her partner. When all the formalities of court etiquette were finished, the girl told Raffaello that he could stand up. She thanked him for his oath, and he responded by also expressing his gratitude to her. After that, their conversation turned from social to casual. The princess lightheartedly told the Duke that she could only imagine how hard it was for him to believe her, and thanked him again for accepting her offer. They stood facing each other and looked each other in the face. She asked the Duke again if it had been difficult for him to make this decision, and again assured him that he would never regret his oath. Raffaello answered the princess that she had already managed to prove something to him. It was obvious to him that without any regrets, the princess had thrown all her efforts into winning his trust as quickly as possible. After that, he thought again, not rushing to begin the next sentence. He wanted to say a lot to the princess, but he did not dare, afraid that it would not look very tactful. Kana waited for him to tell her what else he would say. She shuddered a little and sighed, waiting for his answer. After the next words of her interlocutor, the princess only clenched her fists tighter and began to nervously squeeze the hem of her dress. He told her that for some reason it seemed to him that Her Highness would not allow herself to make a mistake. She thought about her actions recently and thought that, just like always, she could have made a mistake again and seemed to have been wrong about something. One could even say that she had been making nothing but mistakes. The princess began to regret how her relationship with her half-brother had developed. It had been a mistake on her part to get close to this vindictive and selfish man, but she still had no time to be sad and beat herself up over what she had done wrong. She had to focus all her efforts on achieving her goal. She remembered very well what she had experienced in her past life and did not want to repeat her torment under any circumstances. Kaina firmly decided that the current her will belong to herself. No one will manipulate her, and she will receive such long-awaited freedom. That is why the princess decided that she was no longer going to regret anything, but would think only about the present and what awaited her in the future. After she heard the young man's vow, she had no choice but to tell him everything. She said that she was ready to tell him almost everything that she planned to do, but she was still a little cunning because she told the Duke that she would not tell him absolutely everything. In other words, they were in cahoots, but she was not obliged to consult with him or give him all the information because it could even harm him. The Duke and the princess decided to continue their conversation outside the room and went to the garden, located near the imperial palace. She told her companion that if she revealed all her cards, they would both be in serious danger. Raphael heard from his interlocutor that he was offered her partnership, but in fact, she does not really understand what exactly it is. Will happen, because in fact, she was not so good at cooperating. Kana asked the Duke to be patient and trust her in everything. It could turn out that many things would seem suspicious and incomprehensible to him. But the most important thing was for him to trust her and remain calm. She asked the Duke whether, despite all this, and even under such conditions, he would trust her completely, and looked intently into the young man's eyes. The girl laughed and hastened to say that all her words, of course, did not mean that she did not believe him or doubted his abilities. The Duke replied that she should not worry and everything was fine. The princess was amazed by the Duke's words that he trusted her completely and did not need any confirmation from her. He was ready to unquestioningly carry out all her orders and instructions. As they continued to move, he said that even he himself did not know where his inexplicable faith came from. Everything seemed as if he believed in her completely, as in the Lord God. The man and the girl stopped opposite each other, and he added that for some reason he was firmly convinced that she would not do anything that could harm him. Raphael said that he could not doubt this, and besides, he himself wanted to believe the princess, no matter what. Kana was surprised by the next thing the Duke did. Although she remembered his illness very well and even tried to avoid such things, he took her hand again. It seemed that something incredible had happened, which in the original book was written about as something unshakable. But now it began to change before her eyes. The Duke, as if nothing had happened, probably did not feel the symptoms of his illness and continued to hold her hand tightly in his palm. The Duke remembered what the princess had said about regret. It was an unbearably unpleasant, barely perceptible alien warmth. Alien touches that felt like insects crawling on the skin. He remembered the symptoms of his illness. It was a sickening, disgusting feeling that made everything inside him twist and his blood run cold. Even when he endured it or took medicine, it didn't make him feel better. No matter how hard he tried, it didn't get better. He still held her hand and thought that it could go on like this forever. For the first time, he didn't feel bad from someone's touch, and he wanted to enjoy this feeling for as long as possible. The young man closed his eyes, still bowing before the princess. It was as if he was preparing to tell her something very important. After this, as if having decided on something, on some important words, Raphael opened his eyes and began a sentence, saying that he would not under any circumstances. He again felt some warmth and a feeling of pleasure in his chest. Kneeling before the princess, the young man promised her that he would never regret choosing her. The princess thought that this looked little like an oath of allegiance, but began to turn into some kind of romantic scene, because after his words, the young man kissed her hand again. Kana suddenly felt that her face and ears had become hot, and she probably turned red. Her heart began to beat much faster in her chest. She wanted to shout to the Duke that he trusted her to such an extent, and it was a great honor for her. The young man could not understand the girl's reaction to his words and continued to silently watch her, waiting for some kind of answer. A revolution took place in the princess's thoughts. She thought that she had unwittingly told the Duke too much and began to reproach herself a little for it. She absolutely had to change the subject of their conversation, and she couldn't think of anything better to do than to bring up his engagement again. That's why she asked him if he'd said anything about checking all the other houses. As if by chance, she told the young man that very soon he would meet Lady Olivia. The Duke seemed not to be pleased with this prospect. He reacted very strangely to the princess's words, who said that the girl had just arrived today. But since the moment was not right, she did not invite her to Raffaello. Then, without stopping, the princess promised to introduce the young man to the candidate for the role of his bride next time and arrange a meeting for them. She continued to compliment her newly arrived lady-in-waiting. She wanted to tell the Duke as much as possible about her, and she informed him that she was an incredibly wise and pleasant lady. It seemed to her that the Duke was interested in listening to this, although in fact he was simply showing his good manners in this way, without interrupting the girl. The princess said that Olivia would certainly please the Duke too. She fell silent and waited for his reaction to her story, as if he was very interested, but in fact he was not very interested in her story. As a result, the man did not ask anything about the princess's new maid of honor, but only asked why she constantly talked about this girl in his presence. Raffaello most was why, in conversation with him, the princess always returned to her maid of honor and mentioned Lady Olivia in his presence. When they met in the garden and talked about marriage, Princess Kaina was definitely talking about Olivia. He asked her if she wanted to recommend only her as a wife, and she replied that she was so steadfast and beautiful that there was nothing to find fault with, and they would be a wonderful couple. There was also a significant scene. No, it was more of a disgustingly familiar situation when she brought him portraits and said that these were suitable candidates for him. The man began to nervously clench his hands into fists. He could not understand why the princess was doing this, but it seemed to him more and more as if she wanted him to get together with Lady Olivia. He would really like to understand why the princess behaves like this when she meets him, as if she had no other goal than to advertise this girl to him. The princess kept waiting for him to ask her something, because the man's whole appearance showed that he simply needed to know something. When, finally, he decided to ask her the question that now interested him most of all, he asked Kane why, at every meeting, she spoke to him only about Lady Olivia. This question of his caught the princess completely by surprise. Her eyes widened and she hesitated, not finding the right answer to the question posed to the Dukes. But then she decided to tell him something, and the surprised man heard from her. "I'm sorry if this offended you in any way." It seemed that nothing could upset the young man more than these words of hers. He turned around and decided to leave her, told the princess that he asked her to excuse him, because he had completely forgotten about one urgent matter and asked her permission to take his leave. The princess did not understand what had happened to her companion and interlocutor. She looked at his back and thought about how she could have offended him. She tried to bring him back, but he did not respond to the girl's calls. The Duke was trying to leave this place with quick steps. In his head, there was only one word: for the cause. He repeated it over and over again and thought that this was not just for the cause. The princess's words spoiled his mood. Suddenly he stopped, not understanding why all this touched his soul so much. He thought about where such feelings and thoughts came from in his head. His face turned red, and his heart began to beat strongly in his chest.